What is up? It is the Awesemo Betting Show presented by Yahoo. We have so many intelligent hosts and analysts here at Awesemo, give you all the best information. And then there's me and Eitan, and we're with you here on this super wild card weekend, starting it off on Saturday. What's up, Eitan?
I always ask, in a situation like this, how many people said no before they got down to me? And I'm glad you feel the same way as well. We're both on that low end of the poll, but at least we can appreciate it, Pete. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, my friend.
No, this is great. The first time we've been able to host together. We're the talking guys. Talk. So we can do that for the next 30 minutes or so. And what we'll be doing on this show, the Awesemo Betting Show presented by Yahoo, we will be looking at some of the player props in the two games today, the spread, the over-under, the betting aspect of things. As far as DFS goes, you got a ton of coverage starting up at 2:30 with deeper dives. So stay tuned for that. In the chat, you got some player prop questions, things we want to dive into, all about that, and we'll certainly do that along the way here. Make sure you give a like, subscribe, keep up with all of our shows, our DFS offers, our giveaways, and much, much more. And once you do subscribe, hit that notification button and get yourself alerts when our shows go live. And be sure to check out today's free premium tools and data, which are NBA player projections, MMA fighter rankings, and NHL ownership projections. And I'm already seeing in the chat, anyone else's wife hate them today. Yes, that is the strategy. Now they've expanded this weekend, right? You got 2 games today, 3 games tomorrow. So hopefully you got all your chores out of the way this morning. You were a good dude, did what you had to do, and now get to relax and reap the benefits of that for the next, 3 days now up through Monday night.
Yeah, let's be honest here, right? Even if you're on the West Coast, 1:30 in the afternoon gives you plenty of time. If you're on the East Coast, 4:30 in the afternoon, if you can't get your lazy ass out of bed in the morning and get stuff done in order to sit and watch a couple of hours of football unbothered, I think at this point, Pete, it's on you, right? Not you specifically, but I mean, you out there complaining.
No, it's on you. I took my daughter to the playground, gave my wife a little break for a couple of hours, and now we're ready to roll. I get to do this during nap time, and then football time. Baby can watch the tablet for a little bit. Daddy's going to watch what's happening on the TV. First game of the day. Not the one I'm most excited about. I love this Bills-Patriots game. We'll get into it, the weather, the whole thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I think Raiders-Bengals, I mean, just to throw it off right off the top, it's 6-point favorite. The Cincinnati Bengals, I feel like everybody's giving this game to Cincinnati because of Joe Burrow. Yeah. I'm going to say I like the Raiders a little bit in this spot. Am I nuts?
Yes, you are nuts. But look, okay. I know you well enough and you're talented enough and you know the game well enough that you could easily make an argument that's compelling enough to sway me to the other side. So I'm not locked in cement. My bets may be locked in cement, Pete, but I am not by any means. I'm willing to hear your side. I'm a little surprised at that. But look, the Raiders do have momentum. It's not like anybody can take away from the fact that they're in the playoffs. I will agree on that. I'll concede that point. As down as I am on Vegas in this specific matchup, I don't think that people can say, well, they don't deserve to be there. 16 different sets of circumstances happen to have in order for them to get in. Reality is that they've still had a pretty good offense. Derek Carr can throw the football. Waller should be a really good matchup. I'll let you expand on all that from the positives. I just think this offense here for Cincinnati is so powerful when everybody's on the field. They have 3 guys from our own DFS projections. As you mentioned, we're going to get hours of that, to the player props on Odd Shopper, to just eye test. You've got 3 different guys that can really do some damage with Burrow. And he hasn't thrown a pick in a while. And I know that's probably a death sentence right there, even bringing that up. But he's been really good with the football, even aggressive while being aggressive. So I just think a lot of momentum comes in. And you're right, it's a heavy public play. So maybe that is enough to just drive some people away from that. But I'll eat the chalk. I'll fall into the trap. I'll raise my hand. I'll admit I'm wrong. I got in at 5.5. I'm okay. Really up to 6 at this point is where I'd start to take a hard look at it. But that's my initial, just looking at it from the Cincinnati standpoint, is I just think that they're the better team. But then again, I trust that you have at least come prepared to defend yourself, as unpopular as you alluded to it, a decision as it may be.
No, I thought just saying that would be enough. I have to back it up. No, look, 6 points is a lot, right? We're talking about a lot of points been growing on this line. And I'm not going to argue against Joe Burrow in this Cincinnati offense. Jamar Chase is unbelievable. I mean, he's taking 10-yard slants to the house. He just outraces everybody. This offense is capable of scoring a lot of points. What I'm more concerned about with Cincinnati their defense isn't very good at all. Neither of these teams are the elite in the AFC. I mean, they're basically playing to get waxed by somebody next round. I always like looking at DVOA on Football Outsiders. You look at the weighted DVOA, Cincinnati, about league average. Las Vegas, about league average. You give Cincinnati an edge at home, playing in front of the home crowd to some degree, whatever that's worth at this point. You know, it's going to be a hungry crowd there in the jungle. They haven't seen a winning playoff game in decades now. But I don't trust this Cincinnati defense at all. I don't think their offensive line is very good. We saw the Raiders give the Bengals some problems earlier this season, get after Joe Burrow a little bit. Max Crosby certainly capable of getting after the passer. And the big thing for the Raiders that I like, and I played this on Prize Picks, you can look at it as far as the player props go, Josh Jacobs is finally healthy. He looked terrific last week against the Chargers, and he was dealing with rib injuries and one thing after another. This is a physical running back out of Alabama, cold weather, finally getting 100%. He's been over 100 yards the last few weeks. So I think that Raiders running game could really be a great equalizer here. The key to me is they got to play from, if not ahead, don't fall behind 14-0 in the first few minutes, because then the Raiders, they get away from the run game. They pass. That's your blowout scenario. They played from ahead against the Chargers, and then were able to hold on in that ridiculous game on Sunday night. But that's kidding me. I see points on both sides here, and I like Josh Jacobs to really be the difference maker in this game. I respect Joe Mixon, and you talk about the Cincinnati offense. I do not respect the Cincinnati defense.
Look, I think you bring up something interesting here. I think it was buddy Antoine Murphy about not covering. Raiders won't come off flat. They might even be up early. You mentioned that they can't be down. Vegas really can't be down. So I'll ask you this question with it being somewhat loaded, Pete, because I do think that there's going to be a great live betting opportunity if, in fact, for Cincinnati, Raiders are up, even if they're up 3, 7, 10 points early on in that first quarter, quasi first half. When it's all said and done and we look back at this game, both guys have, and I'll give you the benefit of a box score, right? Hindsight and somewhat, but you can paint in the picture. Both guys are throwing for over 40 times, 45 plus times. It's a total pass-happy, pass-heavy game. And I know that doesn't necessarily add up with Jacobs and Mixon specifically, but who do you think that benefits? If we're looking at the end, the dust and the smoke clears from all the gunfire, and it's a 45 plus attempt on either side, because I'll still side with the Bengals. And I think that there's a really good live betting opportunity for me if I'm even patient and let the Raiders get up 7 to 10 points, like I think we all believe they could get up.
Well, I don't see these teams going back and forth and putting it up that much. Look, you put this game in Las Vegas, I can see that kind of game. I might like Cincinnati a little bit more in that environment. Look, it's cold in Cincinnati today, not as cold as it's going to be in Buffalo. Right? The wind could be a minor factor. It exists. It's not wild. It's not like that Monday night game in Buffalo between the Patriots and the Bills, but the weather's going to be a factor in this game. This isn't a 45-degree day. It's not a 1:00 game. It's not that Bengals-Chiefs game from a couple of weeks ago where we saw them going up and down the field. I do think that the weather is enough of a factor that I'm not sitting there and looking for these teams to be going back and forth 40 times. I don't look at this game as Derek Carr against Joe Burrow. If I did, I would like the Cincinnati Bengals. And I understand the point that you're making here, but that's not the situation. You're talking about a game in mid-January in Cincinnati, below freezing tonight. There is a 10 to 15 mile per hour wind expected. That's enough to at least downgrade the passing game a little bit. Doesn't make it impossible, but it certainly levels the playing field in my eyes. That's why I don't like the 6 points. That is just way too many. I look at this as Cincinnati's deserving of being about a 3-point favorite. If this line was 2.5, I would take Cincinnati. 3.5, I'm taking the Raiders. So it's 6. I'm definitely looking at Las Vegas. That's the way that I view this game.
All right. You bring up something for me then. If I'm going to meet us halfway, then clearly the game total is in play here going under if you believe that there's going to be a lot of run and stay away from high scoring. But an under 23.5 first half total, I'd like it ideally to be at 24 and to see if you could push it. You're probably going to lay around 120, 125 for that extra half point, which is fine because then the push is in play with that field goal over the 3 touchdowns. So if that's the case, 23.5 to 24. But I mean, if it's going to be that cold January game where both teams can rely on pretty good running backs, then you can get a jump on this going under. And look, under 23.5, you're probably going to either only lay minus 105, Pete, or even get even money back on that.
Yeah, I'm not one to think they can't score, even if they're not going back and throwing 40 times.
So you like a lot
I don't,
running,
I don't like
scoring.
either of these defenses. I do think there are points. I think you're going to have to, convert touchdowns. You can't have field goals. You can't be going for it at the goal line and missing. Those would be the keys to get over in this game. But I don't think that running the ball, 40% of the time precludes you from going out and hitting one of these overs. I don't think the over-under in this game is all that high, considering, again, these are capable offenses with not great defenses. 48.5 is doable. You look at that first half spread on the over-under. I think that's doable as well, with a game that, again, just won't be a track meet, in my opinion. Let's hit some of the player props. We'll get into the Patriots-Bills game in a second here. But Joe Mixon, 74.5 is the rushing yardage line. Awesemo projecting him over 98. This is one of the big ones on Odds Shopper, which you should definitely be utilizing today to give you an eye what the data says, what the Awesemo projections say, also where you can find the best lines if you're playing multiple books. So be sure to check all that out. But Joe Mixon, 74.5, you see him getting there?
Yeah, the projection, I was surprised. We have him basically at 100 yards, 98.2 on Odd Shopper. I think that if we wanted to be brave here, we can easily play the over at 74.5. And I look, either way, for me, if I like Cincinnati up, I like them covering. There's a chance they're going to be up even more than that big, running the ball, giving it to Mixon, getting out of this first round, looking to get ahead. Also, to your point, even if it's high scoring, low scoring, touchdowns aside, if it's going to be heavy on the run, then Mixon's going to have himself a game. So I think there are a good couple of pathways to him getting to this over 74.5. And I'm looking to think, why not go over that initial rushing yard and then see if you wanted to push it? You may be able to get it 90 plus at a pretty good return here. For example, like an alternate 90 plus for Jacobs, and again, for Mixon, pardon me, is 80 plus is 106 on FanDuel, 90 plus is 158. You could sprinkle a half unit on that easily. And when you already are going over the 74.5, you can get 158 back on a half unit play, basically off of our own projections that are on Odd Shopper.
Hey, if you like Cincinnati, I'm down with that. If you think Cincinnati's going to run away with this game, go ahead, jump on the Joe Mixon bandwagon. That's how he gets 20 plus carries. That's how he wears down a defense. He gets all those opportunities in the second half, rough weather game. That's the way to do it. I probably wouldn't touch Joe Mixon on the rushing yardage line. I like him to be productive in this game, but I don't see the opportunity for, 20, 25 rushes in this game if the Raiders are keeping it close like I expect them to. I think Joe Burrow's could be active. So, I tend to look at Tyler Boyd. I went over on Tyler Boyd's receiving yardage, and everybody's going to lock in on Jamar Chase. Boyd has been kind of a possession receiver in some ways. His third guy is kind of forgotten about behind Higgins, behind Jamar Chase, but we're not looking at a big number here. Projections like him to get to 50 plus receiving yards today. So that's the one that jumped out to me. Any other player props you really like from this game?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, man. I think for Boyd and Higgins looks like it's moved a little bit, but Boyd absolutely is at 40.5. I see him here in PA on the book. And just to go over that, especially with the projection that we have that's deep, we do have Burrow over 2 as far as touchdowns, passing touchdowns. So I think if you are going to look at somebody on the Bengals, for example, like Boyd or any of the receivers, really, for that matter, and you're going over receiving yards, it would be, you'd take a shot. You'd have to probably either same game parlay the over 1.5 or 2+ TDs for Burrow. If you really wanted to be bold, you can go over the 2.5. But I tell you, a guy who's been popping up a lot, because I was building lineups earlier and I was just trying to check to see on Odd Shopper how that correlates. But we have Zay Jones in there for a decent day. But I think ultimately, if I was going to target somebody specific on the Raiders, it would be Waller. And I would try and go over his receptions, see if I can get a 5.5, over 5.5 receptions at a plus money. And from there, looking at it right here, Pete, for Waller, I thought he was on the board, but so it's over 5.5 at plus 126. That would be, I think, the lone Raiders play for me that I would dabble in.
Yeah, Waller has been a little inconsistent. Maybe he's burned me a couple of times this year. He got hurt on Thanksgiving,
the
and I
matchup,
had him that day. So maybe I just had that in my head a little bit. My fantasy team kind of went down the toilet when he got hurt.
That's fair.
But obviously, he's supposed to be a big threat for this Raiders team. It felt like he never really put it together this year. But hey, if he's healthy now, let's make it happen and see what the Raiders can do. But this should be a fun game. It's the appetizer, right? It's the first game of what we're calling now Super Wild Card Weekend. It's not just Wild Card Weekend anymore. You got to throw the super on top of it now. And we'll get into Patriots-Bills in a moment here. First, tell you about the opportunity to take down a big NFL showdown, single game GPP. Check this deal out through Monday, January 17th. A couple of days from now, our NFL Express weekly pass will only be $1 when you use promo code SUPERWILD at checkout. That's super wild, one word, all caps. Activates a $1 NFL Express weekly pass that gives you access to our player and ownership rankings for all NFL slates and everything we have to offer for showdown and single game contests, including our player projections, ownership projections, and our top players plays tool. That's a week long. That's 6 games this weekend. Dip into next weekend as well. Yeah, another 6 games coming up then. Again, super wild at checkout, or you can simply click the link in the description of this video to activate the promo code. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today, Eitan.
Can I ask you one quick question before we move on to the next game? I'm curious, who across the board, who has, and I have them in front of me, I'm just, as far as odds return, and it's a little bit of a stretch, I get it, but why not? We'll have some fun with a long shot play here. Who has the best shot in this game to score 2+ touchdowns?
Which game are we talking about?
Oh, the first game, sorry.
To score 2+ touchdowns?
Yeah.
Player?
Yes, any player across the board in the Bengals-Raiders game.
Mixon.
Plus 360. It's unfortunate because I agree with you by a mile. So do the books, and they're not budging by any means. You mentioned Boyd, like you're going over Boyd's receiving yards. He's got plus 1,000. There's just no real risk at plus 360, right? Jacobs is 550. Chase is also at that point. You know, maybe T. Higgins at 7.5 to 1.
Waller would be a play.
Waller. Plus 950 for Waller. I think
that's reasonable.
Yeah. I can get behind that. Absolutely.
New England Buffalo. We got about 7 minutes left in the show. Patriots 4.5 getting. Feel like you're used to hosting, and now you're off the clock here. Just
I have no sense of time. Yeah, it's like I'm free right now. I'm free from my restraints.
Let's get the wrap. Bills are favored by 4.5. I mean, I'll say right away, like I did last game, I like the underdog here. I like the Patriots in this spot. What do you make of this game? That should be a lot of fun. It's gonna be like 5 degrees. It's not gonna be as windy as that Monday night game, but we've already seen the Patriots out physical the Bills in Buffalo once. A little different story in New England later in the year, however.
I think for me, the best thing out, and it's been this way, I got it at 44. I'll stay there. I like under. The weather, the two teams, you're talking about the best scoring defense and passing defense versus the second best passing defense and scoring defense. If you like the Patriots, I definitely think that this is a lower score game in which the Bills offense isn't going crazy on the ground. Josh Allen isn't doing a ton. I don't see Mac Jones lighting it up in the air by any means. So I think ultimately both teams stand maybe as good a shot, really, respectively, to win this game and keeping it under. Clearly, this thing could be a higher scoring game, and we could factor that in. But for me, the best play for me has been under 44. As soon as this thing jumped out, it just looked like both teams are going to take their time. Both teams' defenses you can count on. So that's where I began for me, was just going under in the total.
Yeah, Patriots are definitely going to run the ball a ton tonight. I expect to see that. Again, not to the degree we saw a few months ago in Buffalo, but that's the primary thing they're doing. They don't want the ball in Mac Jones' hand every single play. He's been capable as a rookie, but he doesn't have that ceiling. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Justin Herbert. He's not that guy, at least certainly not yet in his rookie year. But the Bills, I know they tried to run the ball a little bit last week, and they did successfully against the likes of the Jets. That's not who they are. I mean, they're so not built for this kind of weather, this kind of game. I feel like, if they were playing in a dome, I would love the Bills in this spot. I don't love them in this spot, being that they want to throw the ball. And I know Josh Allen is the huge arm, should be able to do it. They're finally healthy, fully healthy at receiver here. But, you want to see them run the ball a little bit. It's not what they do. And it's going to be extremely difficult for them to do that against this Patriots defense. It is a little banged up, but not to the degree that I don't like New England to have an opportunity to shut down this Bills offense a little bit.
Yeah, the lower the score is, the better the better the Pats have it, right? Is that a statement that you can get behind? Yeah,
Bills run away and hide from teams. You know, that's what they've done this year. They beat up on some bad teams. They do it a lot in the fourth quarter to make it look good. Even the game last week against the Jets, it was relatively close until they scored 14 unanswered in the fourth. And I feel like they've done that all year.
Yep. You get to beat up on far worse teams, especially from a defensive standpoint. You get to instill your will as a quarterback who could move around. Look, I saw it in Philadelphia over the last 9 weeks. A guy who's really tough to stop on the ground that can also throw the football against really bad or suspect defenses. It starts to, and when you don't pull away or you start off slow, you start to scratch your head. So I would lean, I don't have a play on a side on this. I would lean towards the Patriots only because it favors where I'm going with this. But I think you'll like this. I have Harris plus 125 anytime TD. He's at plus 750. If you just, I'm not asking you to, but if you just wanted to sprinkle a little bit on 2+ TDs for Harris. He's got a TD in 5 straight, 10 of his last 11 games, Pete. So he's clearly doing something even in low volume because it's goal line / red zone opportunity. So although it doesn't totally correlate, I would still under 44 and definitely identify Harris there as an anytime TD scorer.
I like the sprinkles, sprinkle it in, make it happen. Like you make a little pizza pie, getting that Parmesan on there. I dig all that. The other one I looked at is Gabriel Davis of the Buffalo Bills. He did a nice job filling in when they weren't fully healthy for a while. Last week, he was terrible. He had 13 targets, caught 3 balls, dropped 3 others. And now Emmanuel Sanders is back in the lineup. I don't think we're going to see a lot of Gabriel Davis tonight. I'll go under on the receptions, which the Awesemo projections like. I'd go under on the yardage. I just don't think he sees a lot of snaps today.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. If you can work him in a couple of plays, like Gabriel Davis now at a same game parlay option where you can fade multiple, if it's receiving yards, receptions, work that in on something else. And again, OddsShopper has this all out here, as you've seen, as Pete's been mentioning, it's free. You can just go right there. You're going to get all the projections free. No other shop site's doing that. So under receptions, under receiving yards, I think now you can start to build almost a little, even if it's a 2-leg, same game parlay to where you can add whatever else you like. If it's the Patriots, if it's a side or the under, what have you. But yeah, take advantage of Davis still being on the books, right? Because in some cases, it would be surprising that you could still bet him because his receiving number and even receiving yardage is so low. So yeah, absolutely. I love that.
I'm getting busted in the chat. Gabriel Davis, not Gabriel.
Oh, that's fine.
Mixing it up.
Do you know how many people have misspelled or mispronounced my name in this chat? All right. Yeah? They're all hypocrites. If they play anybody playing the name game who can't pronounce my name's a hypocrite. So
be sure to check out. We have partnered with Yahoo Fantasy this NFL season. I love playing over at Yahoo. You can check out our exclusive limited time offer. It gets you 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Now you need to be new to Yahoo. Sign up for an account via the link below. Deposit and play. Yahoo will send us your name after playing your first paid contest, and we'll get you your coupon. Yahoo today, $500,000 NFL wildcard ballers, and you have a $75,000 playoff game changer featuring no management fee. And there's no management fee in the single game for the Patriots-Bills as well. Just put both quarterbacks in. That's number one thing that'll help you out when you play those single games on Yahoo. So make sure you use our DFS tools or projections designed specifically for Yahoo to give yourself the best shot at winning big. So we broke down both these games, Eitan. You want to lock anything up? What do you feel best about? What's your number one? No fail. This is happening today.
Does it? Oh, it has to be today. It can't be across the weekend. I can't slink.
No, we're not talking about your Eagles today. There's a whole other show and things to do tomorrow. We're saving it up.
I like how you preemptively shut that shit down. Thank you. All right.
That's what I'm here for.
The favorite play on the board is under 44. This game does not get anywhere close than that. Both of these defenses come to play. If the Bills sleek one out, eke one out, what have you, or the Patriots pull off the dog upset, that's fine. But either way, this thing stays under 44. Pete McCarthy, lock it up.
Lock it up. I'm going to lock up the Patriots. I'm going to hate myself for it because I'm going to be rooting for the Bills tonight because I can't root for the Patriots. But Patriots are going to win this game. They're going to go to Buffalo. The Zubas is going to melt. There's going to be a lot of unhappy Bills fans again in Buffalo, but they're accustomed to it.
I love it.
It's a sad thing,
man.
It's a sad thing.
we're both correlating the same thing, though. I'll root for the Patriots because, again, that helps me. So.
Yeah, we see the game in a similar way here. Again, give us a like, subscribe, keep up with all of our shows, our DFS offers, our giveaways, much more. We appreciate the super chat that came in earlier. It's very kind of you to do. And this was cool. It's nice to wrap you a little bit here, Aton, or let's see, Eton. How else are we pronouncing it in the chat? Because you have opened up this this whole thing here. Eaton.
I've gotten Anton. I've gotten
Slander.
Anthony. I've gotten Anthony. I've gotten Exton. I got that a couple of times from a teacher. Yeah, there's a place in Exton, PA. It's called Exton, PA. But yeah, people would call me, a teacher called me Exton for a little bit.
I like that. You should have rolled with that. That should have been your radio name.
I got Elton, like EL-ton. People thought that it was like L something. There. Yeah, so it's been butchered. There you go.
Elton
Have at
John.
it, chat. All right.
Well,
here's the good news, Pete. Nobody's going to remember Gabby Davis after this one.
That's right. This is my whole plan, is to just focus in on your name and get away from my errors here. This has been the Awesemo Betting Show presented by Yahoo. Ton of content coming up, taking you all the way to kickoff for the Raiders and the Bengals. NFL Deeper Dive coming up next, so just chill out. Get involved in the chat, yell at each other, call each other names, have some fun in there. Call us names, that's fine.
Yeah,
then live before lock, Aton will be back with the NBA Deeper Dive coming up at 4:45 Eastern as well. Aton, pleasure. I'm Petey Mac.
My friend.
Happy betting, people.
It is the Awesemo NFL Deeper Dive, kicking off the NFL playoffs. It is myself, joined here by Neil Orfield. I'm going to tilt my camera down just a touch. Show is sponsored by Yahoo, and not too much going on a two-game slate, but we definitely have some strategy here to talk about. We'll go position by position, try to get as much strategy here as possible. If you guys have any questions at all, please ask them over the course of the show, and Neil and I will try to answer them. I think this is a slate that certainly sets up differently than most NFL slates. And I want to ask you, Neil, how do you approach a two-game NFL slate as compared to some of the regular full-size NFL slates that we're typically dealing with?
I mean, I think you need to take some bigger risks just in general. You got to play some players that make you a little bit uncomfortable. If you're playing all players that make you comfortable in this one, you're probably going to be duped 1,000 times. So keep that in mind. And maybe that's okay. If you're only playing one lineup and you have $25 into it and you have a shot at winning a few thousand, that's pretty good ROI. For me, I want to avoid those as much as I can. So I'll be taking shots on some players that I don't love, that I don't think are really high probability plays, but you just need one of those plays to go off. And if you've got them in your lineup, then maybe it'll be a little bit unique.
And then, I mean, I know that for tournaments in football, we're generally pretty sensitive to ownership. Does that become even more so on just a two-game slate?
Yeah, I think so. At least at the bottom end. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because everybody is kind of high owned. Like most players that you're going to be comfortable with are going to be at least like 20% owned. So it's a lot harder to find real gems on a two-game slate. But yeah, I think that you need to still be making stands here and there, getting above the field on players that you think are too low owned, getting under the field on players you think are too high owned. Yeah, I think that it's always something that's going to be a huge factor for me in building lineups, regardless of the size of the slate. It's just you kind of need to dig a little bit deeper to find some value plays.
Yeah, and then even today in particular, for what you were talking, there's only a handful of players that are projected for less than 10% ownership that are actually viable. Even when we get into looking at some of our projected ownership now, even the dredges, the guys who are, fairly crappy plays, all things considered, like Samaje Perine. I mean, he's still projected for like 7% ownership. So it's not like you're finding these guys who are like 1% to 2% owned that are realistic plays. There's kind of everybody picking up a little bit of ownership. But let's actually get into the game by game here. And I figure the way we'll talk about this, we'll talk about the games individually, the Raiders and the Bengals, the Patriots and the Bills, but we'll also be talking about each of these games as we break them down, each of the individual players. We have an hour to talk about this, and basically every single individual player we can give some attention to just from that standpoint. But let's start with the Raiders-Bengals game. It is the game that has the highest total of the two games on today's slate. Yesterday, you and I did our tournament strategy show, and we talked about Bills-Patriots at the time at a 44-point total. It's actually come down since then. So considerably higher total right now, 48.5 in this Bengals-Raiders game. How do you view the quarterbacks in this game between Joe Burrow and Derek Carr? Who's the higher priority?
I would say for me, the higher priority is still going to be Joe Burrow. He was even more of a priority, I think, yesterday. Things have evened out a little bit, but I think Joe Burrow is still just the clear top option on this slate. Only projected for 33.6% ownership right now, but top stack odds of 46% and optimal 36.4% of the time. So positive leverage in both the top stacks and the optimal lineup tool. Yeah, I think that he is going to be my priority over Derek Carr, but I think those two in general are still going to be my favorites. Just among them, I'd say I'd rather take Joe Burrow going against the Raiders. Actually, both of these defenses are pretty bad in pass DVOA, so that's not a huge factor for me. They're both Raiders are 21st, Bengals are 24th, so you can attack both defenses through the air. But I think that I slightly prefer Joe Burrow just because he's got better weapons. He's the better quarterback. I think that in general, I'll be going probably more to Burrow.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at the builds I have right now, and I'm actually getting Derek Carr as my most rostered quarterback. I do have Joe Burrow number 2, but I just like the price point that we're getting on Derek Carr on both FanDuel and DraftKings, where it's not like we're paying a premium for him. There's still obvious upside. He's not quite the same fantasy quarterback as somebody like a Josh Allen or Joe Burrow. I know we're really just talking about the one game right now, but on a 2-game slate, it's hard to not look at the quarterbacks and just kind of compare them all because they're all relevant to each other for this particular slate. But I mean, still looking at Derek Carr, just the salary he's at, where he is 5,800 on DK, 6,800 on FanDuel. It's a salary that really opens up some of the other positions for us. And it's hard to find a lot of salary savings, particularly running back, wide receiver. There are some high-end guys that we're going to want to get to. There are some cheaper wide receivers. But in general, I think it's pretty sensible to save salary at QB today. And I think that just for me, when I'm making my builds, that's the main reason I'm getting to Derek Carr a lot. So looking at Derek Carr and where he's at, do you envision yourself being above or below the field, currently projected for 24% ownership on DK, 22% on FanDuel?
Yeah, so you kind of maybe have changed my mind. So I say that I like Burrow better. Obviously, if you can get to Burrow, you probably want to get to Burrow. But in the first build that I did make, I've only made one build so far, and I did have Derek Carr in that build. I haven't made my 150 set yet, so it wouldn't be shocking to me, actually, if I do get to more Derek Carr than Joe Burrow, just because I feel like he also has a really high ceiling in this game. Yeah, I think I'm going to be above the field, probably on Derek Carr, at least close to the field. He's just so much easier to get to than Burrow or Allen, and he's just seems like he has much better odds than Mac Jones. So I think that I will get to a fair amount of Derek Carr. My guess would be that I'm going to be above the field just because the price is right there. And I think that he's got a really high ceiling against the Bengals. So yeah, I think that project for 24.3% ownership. My guess is that I'll be above that. I don't think I'm going to get to like 50% Derek Carr. If I got that in my builds, I would probably cut back on his projection and try to get to a little bit more of the other guys. But I think that he's definitely a very solid play. And he, as I said, the one lineup that I hand built so far, I have Derek Carr in there.
Yeah, and the other thing too with Derek Carr in terms of where I like him is just that he's much lesser owned right now than Joe Burrow and Josh Allen. Joe Burrow projects for 35% ownership, Josh Allen at 33%. That is on DK. Then over on FanDuel, Josh Allen's at 38, Joe Burrow at 36.6. It's just, to me, relative to ownership, easier to get overweight to the field on Derek Carr compared to the other two quarterbacks. And then once again, also, when we look at the totals for this game, the total significantly higher in the Bengals-Raiders game than it is in the Bills-Patriots game. How much does that weigh into your decision-making when looking at these quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely factors in. That's why we get to the projections that we have. Vegas generally is built on a lot of smart information, people who know what's going on, what we can expect. So yeah, I definitely factor in the totals that they throw out there, in large part because our projections and our simulations also build those into them. So it's factored into everything, all of the stats that we're using, the Awesemo tools. So yeah, it's a fact. It's not something that I factor in on top of what the tools are doing, I guess. It's just something that, because the tools factor them in, I factor them in because I use the tools.
Yeah, and that's something else that we talked about yesterday when we did the tournament strategy show, is that I don't think that we should be looking at the projections and at the totals and saying like, oh my God, like making an over adjustment based on that information. The total's already built into the projections. But I still think it's an interesting talking point, particularly when there's only two games and you and I are going to be here for an hour. I want to make sure we cover all of the bases, because if I just go through and we go position by position, what quarterback do you like? What running back do you like? For a 2-game slate, we'd be done with this in 15 minutes.
And you want me to talk slower? I can talk slower if you need me to.
Yeah, talk like you're on 0.5 speed, and it's like one of those slow-mo videos where your voice gets deeper and everything slows down.
I really like Derek Carr today.
Which, but more to the point, I just want to make sure we're covering all the bases. We're not leaving any stone unturned, because if we have the time here to work with it, we might as well use it. And that's also why anybody has any questions whatsoever, leave them in the chat. We're probably going to be able to get to them again. Also, while you're doing that, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is much appreciated. Anything else from a quarterback standpoint when it comes to Derek Carr and Joe Burrow that you want to talk about?
No, I mean, like I mentioned, both they're pretty comparable. The opposing defenses, they both have better rush defenses than pass defenses, but they're pretty comparable. So yeah, I think both are solid plays. My guess is that I'm going to be getting to over the field, most likely on both Burrow and Carr.
All right, so let's hit on the running backs now. And what can we say about Joe Mixon? Very clearly the top running back play on the slate. You could even make a case, because of positional value, the top overall play on the slate, because he's so far and above the other running backs we have to choose from. 7,100 on DK, positively leveraged despite being projected for nearly 70% ownership. Same goes on FanDuel at an 8,500 price tag. So the only real question I think with Joe Mixon is, if you're playing cash games on a 2-game slate, you're playing Joe Mixon. But for tournaments, do you think the 70% ownership by the field is warranted?
Yeah, so we got the update today. He was positively leveraged yesterday. He's a little bit negatively leveraged today, at least in my latest run. Maybe it's changed again. That's what happened yesterday on the show. I have him at 79% projected ownership and optimal 75.3% of the time on DraftKings. And I'm happy with that, because it makes me uncomfortable getting over the field on a 2-game slate on anybody who's 70-something% owned. We did it with Tyreek Hill just last week, 2 weeks ago, and we all got burned there because he got hurt and didn't play, got hurt in warmups. Nobody knew, so we all kept him in our lineups, and you really didn't want him. So I just feel like on a 2-game slate, it's hard for me to really want to get above 80% on a player like Mixon. So I think that I will be under the field here if he's projected for a 79% ownership. I think I'll probably even maybe get under 70%, not a ton under, because we do have him optimal at 75.3% of the time. So he's most likely going to be in the optimal lineup is what that's telling us. But when the ownership gets that high, I just rather make some lineups where I'm taking stands, playing some other running backs, maybe go to some cheaper off the board running backs to get a little bit different. So yeah, I think that I'm going to be playing a lot of Joe Mixon. I don't think that I want to get to 79%. What are you doing with Joe Mixon?
Yeah, I'm overweight in my current build, and it's just relative to the other options we have to work with. And we'll talk about Josh Jacobs in a second because he's also in this game. But I just kind of look at the running back options we have overall to choose from, and it's just who pops up in my lineups if it isn't Joe Mixon. It's just the pickings here are so slim. So Josh Jacobs is clearly a secondary option as well, but at least on DK, the price point between the two of them is relatively similar. A little bit more of a price gap on FanDuel. We've got Mixon is 8,500, Josh Jacobs 72, Damian Harris 75. On DK though, it's only $500 from Joe Mixon to Josh Jacobs. And by the way, you are right. We did get a more recent run of ownership that I'm looking at right now, where we have Joe Mixon 70.5% projected owned on FanDuel, a 70.2% chance of being optimal. Over on DK, he is right now projected for 75.8% ownership with a 73% chance of being optimal. But I still end up getting right around 80% in my build just because the options are so slim at running back. And we'll talk about Josh Jacobs next, but do you view Samaje Perine then as a potential option just because there's so much ownership going to Joe Mixon? And if we're not going to play him in some lineups, we need another running back to roster.
Yeah, so Samaje Perine is not the cheaper running back. I found a couple running backs who we'll talk about in the second game that I like a little bit better now. Just looking at the updates and just thinking about it a little bit more, I found some guys that I like a little bit better. So I'll probably play some shares of Samaje Perine. Maybe I don't even know that I will. I might completely. I rarely full fade any of these kinds of players that you kind of need to get different. There's a chance that I'll full fade Samaje Perine. I think I'll probably sprinkle in a few, but I don't want to get to a ton just because I'm updating the tool right now to see where the ownership is at on Perine right now. But my guess is that he's actually going to be a little bit over owned relative to the tools, which means that. That's not the kind of running back that I usually am trying to play if they're getting steam just because they're in the field. We have project for 2.9% ownership. I'm comfortable with that. I'll probably be close to the field. I might even be above the field. I kind of doubt it just because I prefer some other running backs, but I think I'll be close to the field on Perine. Are you playing any?
He's not in my current build. I would feel differently if he was cheaper. So he is 4,900 on DK and he is 51 on FanDuel. You know what I miss? Do you remember number one, this wasn't that long ago. The min price for running backs used to be 3,000. That would make him a lot more interesting of a play on DK. And then something else they also used to do for the NBA playoffs is DK used to lower the min salary from 3,000 to 2,000 just because there's less value on the slate. And I thought it kind of opened up more options and made things more interesting. It's weird to me that Perine just doesn't have a cheaper salary. I don't understand how they will land on 4,900 for him. We've got Ramondre Stevenson is 5,100. Devin Singletary is 5,800. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to get to Perine in that situation where he's just around those guys. To me, the most likely path to success for him is Joe Mixon getting injured, which is certainly a possibility. And maybe if you're playing 150 lineups, there's merit in Perine just from that standpoint. Maybe you make 2 or 3 lineups that don't have Mixon and have Perine just playing the Mixon injury. So are you going to play Perine without Mixon in the lineups that do have him?
Yeah, I think that I'll probably at least do a boost where if I have Mixon in a lineup, then I'll give a negative boost to Perine. So maybe I could get to 1 with the 2 of them together, but I think most likely I'll give it a big enough boost that it'll probably just negate, and I'll just only have Perine in non-Mixon lineups. I think that is the most likely because he could potentially get into the end zone somehow if Joe Mixon just like rushes it 70 yards down to the 1 yard line and then he's winded, so they bring in Perine. That kind of thing does happen sometimes, but I think that it's pretty unlikely. The more likely scenario where Perine is really useful is if Joe Mixon gets hurt for at least like a half of the game. So I think most likely I'm going to have Perine, obviously more so in lineups that don't have Mixon.
Yeah, I could buy the injury narrative more than just the Pirine is going to be good narrative. Playoff game, I think they're going to try to get Mixon out there as much as possible, but it's football and guys get injured. It wouldn't be the most shocking thing if it happened. But once again, my current build, I don't have Pirine in it. Now let's talk about the running backs on the Raiders side of the game, starting with Josh Jacobs. How do you rate him out in comparison to Joe Mixon? Once again, on DK, Joe Mixon, 7,100 to 6,600 for Josh Jacobs. Not that much for a price gap. A little different on FanDuel where it's 72 to 85. So how do you look at Jacobs on FanDuel and how do you look at him on DK?
Yeah, so I definitely prefer Mixon on DraftKings. Just the price is close enough. Mixon is clearly the better back. Jacobs has even more negative leverage than Mixon, even though he's cheaper. Mixon's just much more likely. He's 20.5% more likely to be in the optimal lineup than Josh Jacobs, and he's only 500 more. So yeah, I think that of the two of them, I prefer Mixon. I'm going to have more Mixon than Jacobs. I'm also going to have plenty of Jacobs. Jacobs is in the optimal lineup 52.5% of the time. My guess is I'll have 40% Josh Jacobs or so. I'm not going to be too scared away from Josh Jacobs, but if I have to choose between the two of them, it's going to be Mixon for me. And then on FanDuel, Mixon's a very neutral play, 70.5% projected ownership, 70.2% optimal. So yeah, I like him fine there. Josh Jacobs is significantly cheaper on FanDuel. So my guess is that I might actually get equal to or above the field on Josh Jacobs at 58.3% projected ownership. He's optimal 59.3% of the time. He's only 7,200 there, whereas Mixon's 8,500. So I think on FanDuel, I'd be more likely to get above the field on Josh Jacobs and maybe even have more Josh Jacobs than Joe Mixon. Again, I haven't built my lineups yet, but just based on this data, I think that I'd be more likely to be above the field on Josh Jacobs and under the field on Joe Mixon, or close to the field on Joe Mixon on FanDuel. And then on DraftKings, I'd probably go the opposite way.
Yeah, and we do have a comment here from John. Again, was that DK also used to not put people in stupid positions like LeBron at center today. Hate to break it to you, LeBron's the starting center for the Lakers now. That's the position that he's playing these days, which has been working fairly well for him. Not as much for the Lakers, but less to do with LeBron playing at center and Russell Westbrook. But that's a discussion for a different time. Let's talk about Jalen Richard, the backup running back to Josh Jacobs. And I think there's a case to be made. This could be a pretty positive game script for Jalen Richard, just from the standpoint of he's traditionally been more of a pass catching back. I know they've been giving more pass catching work to Josh Jacobs this season, but is there a case to be made that if the Bengals go up by a couple of touchdowns in this game, that Richard ends up being a pass catcher in the fourth quarter?
Sure, and I prefer Jalen Richard, I think, on FanDuel, which is odd because usually you want those pass catching backs on DraftKings more because it's full point PPR. But Jalen Richard at 4,700 on FanDuel just allows you to get to more lineups than you will on DraftKings. I think he stands out more just based on his salary being lower. I think he's the lowest valuable running back on FanDuel. So on FanDuel, we got him projected for 5.4% ownership. He's optimal 5.4% of the time. My guess is that I'll be even with or above the field, probably above the field on Jalen Richard on FanDuel, frankly. And part of that is just because even if he doesn't do anything, sometimes just having the cheapest player allows you to get to different builds. So I think that I'll probably be above the field on Jalen Richard on FanDuel. On DraftKings, yeah, I think it's a viable. If you want to do a full Bengals onslaught and then throw Jalen Richard in there, that makes some sense to me. As yeah, he's the guy that might get a little bit more work in that scenario where the Bengals just get a huge lead and the Raiders need to play from behind and they're throwing it to Jalen Richard. I think that would make some sense to play some Richard in a Bengals onslaught. He's slight negative leverage overall on DraftKings, 4.9% projected ownership, 4.3% optimal, but that's not really going to scare me away. You just have to, kind of write a narrative with your lineups. And if you're making a Bengals onslaught, I think sure, it makes some sense to get to Jalen Richard in those lineups.
So then I'm going to ask you, just as a follow-up to that, about lineups telling a story and situations where Jalen Richard could potentially be viable. What do you think is the most likely scenario Richard actually lands in an optimal lineup? I have something in mind, but I'm kind of curious for your answer, and then I'll give mine.
I would say that it is a Bengals onslaught where you're using probably your whole salary, or at least you can't get up from Richard to any of the other viable running backs, where you just need that cheapest running back in your build. And probably you're using a wide receiver in the flex spot because none of the other running backs really set themselves apart. I'd say that's probably the most likely scenario. What do you have in mind?
So I actually don't think the most likely scenario for Richard being optimal is him even scoring very many fantasy points, if at all. I think it's a 2-game slate. There aren't that many options to choose from. I think the scenario is just Joe Mixon doesn't have a good game. Josh Jacobs doesn't have a good game. And then a bunch of the wide receivers at the high end have big games. You just need to roster them. That's where I think the path to Rashard being optimal comes in. He might have like 2 catches for 10 yards. And that could end up being optimal if you get big game from Jamar Chase, big game from Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller goes off or something like that. Just from a standpoint of you need to pay up for those pass catchers. And the only scenario to get to them is just going really cheap at running back. So I think the scenario where he ends up being optimal is just like Joe Mixon. Neither Joe Mixon nor Josh Jacobs have decent games.
Yep. I think that you're right. And that's kind of what I said on FanDuel. And now I'm looking on DraftKings. He's also the cheapest viable running back on DraftKings. Yeah. So he actually makes the same amount of sense on both slates. On both sites, I'm probably going to be above the field at 5% projected ownership, or approximately 5% on both sides. I'll probably get to, I don't know that I'll get to 10% because there are other cheaper running backs that I think that do have a better chance of actually putting up decent scores. But I do think that he makes some sense. I like that.
Yeah, and for people questioning why we're talking about Rashard, it's not that you or I are sitting here and me being like, oh, this is my deal with the GPP play of the slate or anything. I don't even know if I have one of those for this particular slate, but it's more so that we have 2 games to talk about. And we're just trying to get in depth to make sure we uncover every single stone. Who knows? Maybe Neil or I will uncover something. We're having just because that's really what Neil and I are doing here. We're having a conversation about the slate. And maybe we'll come across a piece of logic or something as we're talking this out that wouldn't have touched on otherwise. Neither Neil or I are going to advocate for somebody who's a single entry player or even somebody who plays 5 lineups to go play Jalen Rashard in 1, 2, or 3 of them or anything like that. It's more so just what are all of the different scenarios on the slate. If you're just playing one lineup and you're trying to build the most optimal lineup, we haven't even talked about the other game. It's probably going to have Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon and maybe Devin Singletary as well in the flex utility spot. Most likely those are the 3 running backs you're playing. We're just trying to explore all the different avenues for other running backs just to make sure there's nothing that isn't left unturned. But anything else here from the running back position in this game that we should be discussing?
Yeah, so I think we pretty much covered it. Yeah, and I think that's well said. We're talking about Jalen Rashard because it's a 2-game slate, and if you want to win a solo millie, you're going to need to get a little bit different. You're probably not going to do it just by playing the over 50% owned players. So yeah, we're talking only for the largest field. If you're playing in a tournament, even where it's $100 to first, I probably wouldn't take that risk. But if you're playing in the millie, I think he makes some sense. And yeah, I don't think we need to cover anybody else. I think we've covered all 4 really viable running backs in this game.
All right, so let's hit on the wide receivers, and people will be happy because there is no Jalen Rashard of wide receivers to talk about here. We've got actual good wide receivers and a lot of them in this game. Let's start with the Bengals guys. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, all of them really high upside wide receivers, also in really different price ranges. They come with different ceilings, different floors. Which of the Cincinnati wideouts is the highest priority for you?
Here, I'm just trying to go somewhere else. Let me check who is my favorite. I mean, obviously, if you can get to Chase, you're going to get to Chase. He's optimal 42% of the time. I would say based on their ownership versus their optimal lineup probability, it's pretty clearly Tyler Boyd, projected for 35.8% ownership, but he's optimal 44.6% of the time. And he's just so much cheaper. I guess there's kind of a step between all 3 of them. Tyler Boyd is 4,600, so he's super easy to get to. I'm surprised he's only 35.8% owned, given that he's only 4,600. And then you take a step up to T. Higgins. He's a very neutral play in the boom bust tool, which means that I'm going to be getting to approximately 50%. He's 49.1% owned, 49.0% optimal. That's about as neutral as you can get. And that's about where I'm expecting to be on T. Higgins. Just any one of these guys can go off in any given game. Jamar Chase, another step up. He's 7,800. He's projected for 40.2% ownership, but he's optimal 42% of the time. So I would say I'm going to get to whichever one of them fits salary-wise into my build. I'm probably going to have 2 of them in a lot of my builds. I'll probably have all 3 of them in some of my builds just to get different. But I think that in most of my builds, I'll probably have 2 out of these 3 would be my guess. How about you? Do you prioritize them any differently?
It's tough. I'm actually overweight to all 3 in the current builds I have right now. And I just like these Bengals receivers better than the comparable players in the same salary range as them. So if we look at Jamar Chase, I think the talking point is Jamar Chase versus Stephon Diggs. And starting with DK, we've got Chase, 7,800, Diggs, 7,500. Slightly more ownership going to Jamar Chase, but we project him so much higher. We have him with a 2-point higher average projection. Also, I think the upside is higher. And then also just getting back to the overall totals in this game, the total in the Cincinnati Raiders game is much higher than the Bills Patriots game. There are some weather concerns in the Bills game that we're going to be talking about later on, which factors into this, why we think there could be slightly less passing. But we look at Diggs here in this spot, and it's him or Chase, and I have to kind of prioritize Chase. If you look right now in the boom bust tool, we've got Jamar Chase. He is currently with a... Let's see. It would help if I spelled his name right. I find that happens to be a lot when I look at the boom bust tool when I'm talking on a show and I'm trying to figure out like, oh, well, let me just look for this guy's name. It's like, oh, right, there's an apostrophe in Jamar Chase. So Jamar Chase with a 41.5% chance to be in the optimal lineup on DK compared to 31.7% for Stephon Diggs. Over on FanDuel, Jamar Chase 49.5% chance to be optimal, 34.9% for Stephon Diggs. That's a really big difference for a 2-game slate. So if I'm spending up, it's going to be Chase over Diggs for me. Then we go in the mid-range. Hunter Renfrow versus T. Higgins. I prefer Higgins to Renfrow. Once again, we have Higgins projected for a lot more fantasy points than him. And then you get the same thing once you get into the mid-range. It's Tyler Boyd versus the likes of Jacoby Myers, Gabriel Davis, and he projects a lot higher than them as well. So now I'm going to ask you a question very similar to a question I asked you yesterday. The reason it's going to sound similar is because it's the exact same question. Do you have any issue playing all 3 of the Bengals wideouts in the same lineup together?
Yeah, and I said yesterday, I do not have that issue. I'm not going to set any rule limiting my number of Bengals receivers. Now, obviously, it's unlikely that all 3 of them go off and all 3 of them are in the optimal lineup. But I think that the uniqueness factor, having them by yourself, having that being a unique build, more than offsets the lower likelihood that all 3 of them go off. And they're certainly capable of it. As I said yesterday, there was a game 2 or 3 weeks ago where all 3 of them just went off, and it was just a Bengals full onslaught, crushed it, and would have been even better if Tyler Boyd had not had a touchdown called back late. All 3 of them would have had over 20 DK fantasy points. And on a 2-game slate, that same game would, I think pretty clearly all 3 of them would be optimal on this 2-game slate. So I don't think it's unlikely at all. I mean, it's more likely that not all 3 of them are there, but I don't think that it's unlikely that all 3 of them make it into the optimal lineup. So I will not be setting any rules to limit them. And as I said yesterday, now this is getting even a little bit nuttier. I'm not even going to say that I can't have 4 pass catchers. I might even allow for CJ Uzomah to be in lineups with all 3 of them, just because on a slate like this, it wouldn't be shocking to me if a tight end scoring 5 or 6 fantasy points is the optimal tight end, and it wouldn't shock me if that is CJ Uzomah, even while the other 3 go off. So yeah, I'm not limiting myself there. I don't think I have a ton of all 3 of them together. I'm certainly not going to have a ton of all 4 of them together, but I'm also not going to totally exclude it from my possible lineups.
All right, so now let's talk about the Raiders wide receivers, where we've got Hunter Renfrow. He's going to be popular. A pretty good chunk of ownership going to Zay Jones, which is a little surprising to me at first look. Bryan Edwards, he's going to be the least popular of the what I would call 3 viable pass catchers for the Raiders. How do you look at Hunter Renfrow compared to some of the high-end wide receivers on the Bengals? And then after that, how do you view Zay Jones as a potential value option?
Yeah, so following the boom bust tool, I think Hunter Renfrow is a very neutral play. I like him as a play in a vacuum. I'm going to have a lot more T. Higgins, who's just slightly cheaper, and in the optimal more than 20% more often than Hunter Renfrow. So I'm going to be getting to a lot more T. Higgins, but I'll probably have plenty of lineups that have both of them in there. We have Hunter Renfrow projected for 33.8% ownership, but optimal 32.6% of the time. Very slightly negative. That's essentially a neutral play. We might get another update in the next hour where his ownership comes down or his optimal lineup percentage goes up a little bit and it becomes a positively leveraged play. I think he's fairly neutral. My guess is I'll have 30-something% Hunter Renfrow in my 150 lineups. I'll get to a lot more T. Higgins. Those are really the only 2 in the 6,000 range. So we don't, as far as comparable receivers go, I prefer Higgins to Renfrow. Wouldn't be that shocking if Renfrow goes off, scores more than Higgins. But yeah, I'll be getting to more Higgins than Renfrow.
Yeah, and then as somebody pointed out in the YouTube chat, there are a lot of targets going to Zay Jones recently. Just for instance, let's look at his last 4 games. 9 targets, 8 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, particularly where PPR is really valued on DraftKings. And then even on FanDuel, if a receiver like Zay Jones, typically this kind of passing game isn't all that valuable. It kind of is for a 2-game slate where we're hurting for value. This is more volume for Zay Jones than I really did remember until you start to look at his box scores. How do you look at him as a cheap option for value?
Yeah, he looks great. And I'm less surprised that he's 35.4% optimal than I am that the field is getting to him 29.9% of the time. That's the part that really shocks me, is that people have picked up on Zay Jones, because it took me a while. I will be playing Zay Jones. My guess is that I'll be above the field. He's projected for, like I said, 29.9% ownership, optimal 35.4% of the time. So I think that I will be over that 29.9%. I'm not going to go crazy here. I don't think I'm going to have 50% Zay Jones, but my guess is that I'll have maybe close to that optimal lineup percentage, 35 to 40%.
All right, let's move over to the tight ends now, which I think is a pretty easy one to discuss today. If you have the salary cap to pay up for Darren Waller, pay up for Darren Waller today. The other available tight ends we have, it is Dawson Knox, Hunter Henry, CJ Uzomah, Foster Moreau. To me, kind of is out of the mix just because we have Darren Waller available. I understand last week already had 2 catches for 50 yards, but in general, Foster Moreau did shit when he was a chalk player without Darren Waller in the lineup. It would be crazy if he was to go off with Darren Waller. But do you see the slate any differently? It's if you get to Darren Waller, you can. If not, it's okay to play the other guys, but Waller has to be the priority.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. At this point, it's kind of funny. I'm looking at the boom bust tool. All 5 of the lineup of the tight ends in the boom bust tool are negatively leveraged on DraftKings. So apparently, I guess that means some people will be playing 2 tight end lineups more than they should. You probably don't want 2 tight ends on this slate in your lineups. Yeah, I think if you can get to Darren Waller, pretty clearly you get to Darren Waller. He's by far the best in terms of optimal lineup percentage, 51.3% of the time. Step down to CJ Uzomah. I'm actually kind of surprised to see he is optimal lineup 36.4% of the time. So, and that's with him being more expensive than Jonnu Smith. So that kind of surprises me that he is that much higher than Jonnu Smith's only optimal 4.8% of the time. That's probably the biggest surprise to me, that even on a 2-game slate, Jonnu Smith, who signed a huge contract this offseason, is only optimal 4.8% of the time at 2,700. My guess is that I'll play some Jonnu Smith. I wouldn't be surprised if I even get up to like 10%. Sometimes, you gotta make some ugly plays. I'll probably play a little bit of Jonnu Smith, but yeah, I think you said it, Darren Waller, or just go to whoever you think makes sense in your lineup. Everybody else, Dawson Knox, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, CJ Uzomah, they're all viable. Play them where you want to play them. But if you can get to Darren Waller, 5,700 is just a really nice price tag for him. I'm going to be playing a lot of Waller.
Yeah, so talking about CJ Uzomah now, he's projected for 30% ownership over on FanDuel. DraftKings, Uzomah's crazy popular to an extent that I almost don't even understand. We're looking at over 40% for Uzomah. Cool. It's a 2-game slate. This is a little bit of curious ownership to me, though. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So apparently it has updated again, because I see Uzomah at 36.5. Yeah, that really surprises me, even on a 2-game slate, to see Uzomah that high. He had the one game where he went completely off. I think that was a game that Richie G in our Discord won $500,000 with Uzomah at captain on a Monday Night Football game. So yeah, Uzomah has had, and I think he's had a few really nice games this year, and maybe that's what people are banking on. But that's really high ownership for a player like Uzomah, who just misses a lot more frequently than he hits. What do we have as his optimal lineup here? I'll refresh so I can look at the new numbers myself.
So at least, and I'll refresh the most recent run. He was about neutral relative to his projected odds being optimal. To his ownership, he is 36.5% optimal on DK, 36.4 or 36.5, 36.4 ownership to optimal rate over on FanDuel. It is 28.1 to 28%. So super neutral. To me, though, if I have the salary space to send up, it's going to be Waller for me at tight end. Uzomah probably more for lineups that have Joe Burrow if I'm looking for another stack option. But to me, it's kind of Waller or bust at tight end.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Waller's clearly the best play. I'm going to be sprinkling in the other guys. And yeah, Foster Moreau, I played some in their last game just because Waller was expected to be limited. They said he was going to be limited. So I thought maybe I had one more week where Foster Moreau might do something at no ownership, and then he did not do anything. So I think that at this point we can expect Waller to most likely be a full go. I'm probably not going to be playing any, or at least not much, Foster Moreau. I'll probably just be sticking to these 5 tight ends for the most part.
The NFL Deeper Dive, it is sponsored by Yahoo. If you guys are not familiar with Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, we have a really good partnership with them, and everybody should be. familiar with this by now because we've been working with Yahoo for a little bit. So not the first time you guys have heard this ad read, but here's one thing that's a little bit different than some of the stuff we've seen in the past. If you sign up for Yahoo using the link in the description box below, you head on over to Yahoo, deposit, enter contest, you do get your free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum, but also you could claim a free $10 of site credit just by clicking the video link in the description box below when you go and sign up for Yahoo and make a deposit. So that is $10 free of site credit. And then also there's always really good GPPs that run over at Yahoo. They're all the time giving away overlay free money. So it's certainly a site that is worth checking out and definitely good value that you won't find in other places. There certainly isn't overlay being offered for free at FanDuel or DraftKings very regularly. Yahoo is doing it as they're trying to build their customer base. So check that out. One other thing that I want to just shout out as we're talking about this 2-game slate is if you guys are looking to place any prop bets today, check out OddsShopper, free tool to use that we have over at Awesemo.com. We have OddsShopper that's going to give you projected odds on all player props, projected odds of them to hit over, under, expected ROI. And here's one bet that stands out for today's slate, and this will lead us into our next bit of games. Ramondre Stevenson, under 41.5 rushing yards. We do have the under hitting 70% of the time for a 33% expected ROI. So if you're looking to place a prop bet today, Ramondre Stevenson is one that does stand out. All right, let's head on over to the quote unquote bad weather game, Buffalo Bills, New England Patriots. Now, we had some people questioning us yesterday about the weather because it's not expected to be windy. It's not expected to be snowing. It is expected to be very cold, very, very cold. And the way that these kind of temperatures impact games is it's harder for quarterbacks to complete passes. And it's not quite as impactful as like 30-mile-per-hour winds, but still we could expect something like a 10 to 15% reduction in quarterback performance just based on that we're looking at sub 10-degree weather in this game. I saw somebody on Twitter had posted that there's been something like, I think it's 6 playoff games in the last 15 years that have had temperatures this cold. None of them have ever scored more than 43 points. So it's a small sample size, but still we're expecting this game to be a bit lower scoring than normal because of that. As a result, we're looking at the lower total. Josh Allen projects a little bit lower than normal. How high of a priority is he for you to spend up for? I am finding it a little difficult to get to him on FanDuel and DK.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I prefer Joe Burrow and Derek Carr. I'm still going to be playing plenty of Josh Allen. I'll play probably more than 25% Josh Allen, I would guess, but he is negative leverage in the tools. In the Boom Bust tool on DraftKings, he's projected for 35.3% ownership, but he's optimal only 30.9% of the time. So he's a negatively leveraged play. He's just so much more expensive. It wouldn't be that shocking if he is the highest scoring quarterback on the slate, which is why I'm not going to full fade Josh Allen. Like I said, I'll probably have 25% or so be my guess. I haven't built yet. I'll be playing plenty. I just think that I'm going to be prioritizing Joe Burrow and Derek Carr in the higher scoring game environment a little bit more. And I'll just take shots, bullets here and there from the Bills and Patriots game. More likely, I'm not going to be doing a ton of stacks of that game. So I'll get some, but I'm not going to be going overboard. I'll be playing a lot more of the other guys. Sounds like you're in the same boat.
Yeah, and that's also why I spent more time on the Raiders-Bengals game. Number one, I'm going to pretend like it was intentional. Part of it also is because I was really concerned about the pacing. I was like, well, if we go too fast, this is going to be really hard. We have to talk about this other game for a long time. But also, I do think it's a much more relevant DFS game for today's particular slate. So I do think there's more guys that are worth talking about on that side. And then talking about Mac Jones at QB, I mean, if you need to save salary, go for it. But his odds of being optimal are very low. His projected ownership is low, but for good reason. The last time we saw the Bills and Patriots play in a game with suboptimal weather, Mac Jones threw the ball 3 times. He completed 2 of the passes. It makes it really difficult to trust him in a playoff game. And it doesn't appear that Bill Belichick trusts him all that much. I'm sure if they get into a situation where they're behind and they absolutely have to throw the ball, they will. But I don't know that we're going to get a guaranteed big passing performance from Mac Jones. It makes it tough for me to trust him. It makes me tough to trust his wide receivers when I don't know that Belichick's going to even let him throw the ball more than 15 times in this game by a mile. Mac Jones is the worst QB play today.
Yeah. Here's my one question for you. Would you consider playing Mac Jones naked in this, just because he allows you to get up to other players? Like we were talking about with Jalen Richard, it might not be that he puts up a ton of points, but say the other 3 quarterbacks, none of them individually puts up too many, a 25-point plus score. They all put up mediocre scores. Mac Jones just allows you to get to all of the other expensive plays. Would you consider ever playing Mac Jones naked?
No, and here's why. There's not that big of a price gap between him and Derek Carr. It's $500 on DK. It's $300 on FanDuel. If we were looking at like $1,200 difference or something like that, then it would be different to me. Not where it's 3 and 500. I just don't think the salary savings unlocks that much relative to what our projections and optimal lineup odds say.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think I would maybe be willing to in very limited circumstances, because in that case where you just need the cheapest, Mac Jones, he is 500 cheaper. So there could potentially be some lineups that you can get to with Mac Jones and not get to with Derek Carr. And also in that case, he only needs to outscore Derek Carr if you just need the cheap quarterback. And there is some chance that he outscores Derek Carr in raw points. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. It's not something that I would highly recommend, though, not something I'm going to be doing a ton of. I think that on this slate, so most main slates, I will require at least one pass catcher with my quarterback. I think on a slate like this, I'm not going to, just because it's 2 games and I'm almost always going to have it just naturally. I'm just going to use the boost function and give boost to wide receivers when they're played with a quarterback, so that most likely I'm always going to have a Patriots receiver with Mac Jones. But just because you need to get so unique, and it is at least plausible that he gets there in the optimal lineup without bringing somebody along with him, I think that I'll allow it. And just looking at the boom bust and the top stacks tool, this is something I've never seen before. Top stack odds 0.0% for Mac Jones. So, but optimal 7.5%. So he's a slightly positive. Project for 7.4% ownership, optimal 7.5% of the time. So slight positive leverage in the boom bust tool. I almost thought this was an error, but I updated it just now and it's still at 0% top stack. And it's actually plausible to me that he's just not ever the top stack. So I think that I might allow it, but I understand what you're saying. I think that makes some sense. It's not something that I feel really strongly about. It's just something that I think that for today, just because I like to get weird on a 2-game slate, I might just allow some naked Mac Jones if that's what Fantasy Cruncher gives me.
All right, so it's running back time now, and gut feeling, I think you're going to have a take here, because you said before we were talking about running backs that there was somebody a little off the board you alluded to liking before, we were going to talk about later, and you didn't talk about him in the Bengals. You didn't talk about him in the Bengals Raiders game, so I think he's going to come up here. Can I guess who that guy is?
I bet you can.
I
bet you get it on your first try.
Is it Brandon Bolden?
So it's actually a combo of 2 players. Yes. So it's Brandon Bolden and it's Ramondre Stevenson. For the same reasons that we talked about yesterday, we talked about how we both kind of want to take some shots at the Buccaneers, Keyshawn Vaughn and the Bucks. I guess just Keyshawn Vaughn is what you were saying. Just in case, because Leonard Fournette's coming into that game a little bit hampered. In this game, Damian Harris is questionable with a hamstring injury. And that makes me think, they might not want to give Damian Harris a full workload. And even if they do want to give Damian Harris a full workload, there's some chance with a hamstring, it can just pop up anytime. So if Ramondre Stevenson is going to stay at projected 4.2% ownership and Brandon Bolden is going to come in at what he's projected for 2.6% ownership, I'm going to be, I think, well above the field on both of them, just because I think that ownership assumes everybody's assuming that Damian Harris is a full go. So I'm going to build even before the first game as though these guys are going to have more of a workload than you would typically expect for them. And I think both of them are going to have a role regardless, right? I mean, even if Damian Harris does have a full workload, I think they're going to be rushing the ball a lot. And you can attack this Bills rush defense more so than the pass defense. They're number 11 in rush DVOA, number 1 in pass DVOA. We've seen some running backs have big games against them, including, like you said, the last time these 2 teams played in a bad weather game, they just rushed it the whole game. We know that Bill Belichick has that in his bag of tricks. They won that game. So it wouldn't be that shocking to see them go back to that same approach and just rush it and just kind of rotate through these 3 guys. So I think that I am going to get to probably well above the field on both Ramondre Stevenson and Brandon Bolden, even though in this case, so Brandon Bolden, I assume the reason that you went to him right away is because he actually looks great in the tools. So he is a play that I think is a solid play, even assuming Damian Harris has a full workload. Project for 2.6% ownership, but optimal 6.3% of the time. Yeah, I'm going to really like that. I think Ramondre Stevenson is more off the board play that I'm just kind of going with my gut. You got to get weird. I think that he has better than he's projected for 4.2% ownership. Even though our tools say 4.1% optimal, I think that to me, just instinctively, I think that it is actually a little bit better than that. So I think I'm going to be playing both of them. Do you think he'll get too much of either of those guys?
I prefer Brandon Bolden just because he brings a different element to the game. He's a pretty capable pass catcher, and we didn't see very many big fantasy games out of him this year, but he was kind of remarkably consistent. If you look at his box scores this year relative to what we normally see out of football, particularly backup running backs, he was pretty regularly somebody who was catching 3-4 passes a game, which on DK with the PPR bonus, he's definitely a stronger player for me on DK than FanDuel. But that could be valuable. And the same thing we talked about Jalen Richard before, which was what is the situation where Jalen Richard is viable or optimal? Could be the same as Brandon Bolden, which is just what if the high-end running backs don't come through for us today? Well, then you're just going to need to have one of the cheaper guys, right? If everybody kind of sucks, then I want the cheapest guy who also sucks. And that's where Brandon Bolden could come into play. You never know. 7 fantasy points from him where he has maybe 3 catches for 20 yards and 20 rushing yards, something like that. It could be good enough on a 2-game slate. And considering his really low ownership, I do view him, of all of the running backs that are projected for really low ownership today, he's my favorite. It's not the strongest endorsement of the world, but I prefer Brandon Bolden to the likes of Samaje Perine, Ramondre Stevenson, and Jalen Richard.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I will say, so I just gave those numbers. Those are actually pre-update. Ramondre Stevenson is actually a slight positive leverage play now as well, but Brandon Bolden is more so projected now for 4.3% ownership. So that's a bummer. It's come up a little bit, but still optimal 5.5% of the time. So still a positive leverage play. Ramondre Stevenson also, his optimal lineup percentage has gone up and his ownership hasn't gone up as much. So he's projected for 4.7% ownership, optimal 5.6% of the time. So I'm glad that kind of is more in line with what I am assuming about this game. So I think that makes me more comfortable even going above the field on both of these guys.
And then how do you view the running backs we generally care more about between these teams? Damian Harris, Devin Singletary. Of the two of them, which do you prefer? They're both also kind of in their own sort of salary range on DK, 5,800 for Singletary, 64 for Damian Harris. Over on FanDuel, we've got Damian Harris priced all the way up to 7,500, Singletary at 69. I actually like Singletary quite a bit in this game, and he's seen an uptick in workload. For the longest time, the Bills were really a pass-heavy team that was hesitant to run the football, but Devin Singletary in recent games, 19, 23, 12, 22 rushing attempts as they've gotten away from guys like Zach Moss and Matt Breida in the run game. So I like Singletary a lot. It's hard for me to get behind Damian Harris just because there are so many RBs in the Patriots backfield, and that's always historically been a tough situation to decipher.
Yeah, so I think that I actually prefer Damian Harris if you can get there. If you can get to the salary, I'm going to have plenty of Devin Singletary just because he is cheaper than Harris on both sites. But in the lineups where I'm not going with Bolden or Ramondre Stevenson, like I said, I just think that the Patriots are going to be rushing a lot this game. And of course, I'm going to be wrong. They're going to throw it 30 times because Bill Belichick just likes to mess with us. But my expectation is that the Patriots will be running the ball a lot, whereas the Bills really like to pass. They like to throw more so than the Patriots do. So I prefer Damian Harris, but he is more expensive on both sites. He is the positive leverage of the two of them. Damian Harris projected for 16.6% ownership, but optimal 25.6% of the time. So that's on DraftKings. So I prefer Damian Harris. Devin Singletary projected for 54.9% ownership, optimal 49.3% of the time. So in a vacuum, Devin Singletary is going to be optimal more frequently than Damian Harris, but he is over-owned relative to that optimal lineup probability, whereas Damian Harris is under-owned. Just 16.6% on a 2-game slate seems too low for me for Damian Harris. So I prefer Damian Harris when I can get to him, but I'm also comfortable playing Devin Singletary in the lineups where I can't get to Damian Harris.
Yep, fair enough. I think that makes sense. Points per dollar basis, I do like Singletary quite a bit. And if somebody is a sick enough individual that you're playing cash games on a 2-game football slate, Devin Singletary, somebody who should be in that lineup, particularly where his salary point is. Something else you guys should be checking out. If you are new or want to check out the tools we have over at Awesemo.com, we have access to our NFL Express Weekly Pass for only $1 when you sign up now using the promo code SUPERWILD at checkout. That is SUPERWILD, SUPERWILD, all capital letters. Just $1, you get access to all of the premium Express tools that we have for football. So this is going to be really valuable, particularly if you're looking to play all the showdown slates for this weekend and everything upcoming, because there's going to be Millionaire Maker contests for showdown contests Saturday night, Sunday night, and the Monday night game. So you're getting extra contests in there. It's only $1. I think it's a really good way to get behind the paywall and check out stuff that Neil and I like to use, particularly for showdown slates. the single game optimal tool, really, really valuable information. And I wouldn't know how to build showdown lineups without it, if I'm being honest. So check that out using the promo code SuperWild, just $1. All right, let's hit on these wide receivers now. And the wide receivers in this game, nowhere near as interesting to me as what we had in the first game. And we could look at Stephon Diggs, who certainly is viable. But to me, if I'm paying up for wide receiver, it's Jamar Chase over Stephon Diggs all day if you're just playing one single entry lineup. How are you going to be viewing Stephon Diggs in this spot when there's a lot of other wide receivers to get to, and our projection for him is actually even less than somebody like T. Higgins, who's a lot cheaper?
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to some Stephon Diggs, but like you said, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they're just, the other guys look better at the top. So I don't want to go overboard on Stephon Diggs. I don't think that I'm going to go too far under that optimal lineup percentage, even though, so he's a negative leverage play, project for 34.3% ownership, optimal 31.7% of the time. I think that I'll be probably right around 30%, just a little bit under that optimal lineup probability, so that I can get leverage on the guys who are positively leveraged. But I don't want to get too great. I don't want to, fade him completely, pay 10% Stephon Diggs. I think I'll probably get up to at least 25-30% of Stephon Diggs, because he is just a player who can put up points. Even in a game environment like this, I think that they're going to be targeting him most likely. So I don't want to full fade him on a 2-game slate, but probably 30% or so, just a little bit under the field.
Then how do you view the cheap wide receivers in this game? Because, we've got guys like Gabriel Davis, Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, and I just don't think any of these guys relative to the ownerships are players that I'm going to be all that interested in, especially when we talked about all of the cheaper wide receivers we do think are viable from Bengals Raiders. If you're only playing one cheap wide receiver in this game, who is it that you would be going to?
Yeah, we talked about him yesterday. Emmanuel Sanders is just not owned quite enough because people are thinking that Gabriel Davis has taken over that role. So based on the boom bust tool, it looks like Gabriel Davis is going to be a negative leverage play and Emmanuel Sanders is going to be a positive leverage play. We're expecting Emmanuel Sanders to be the wide receiver 3 there, I believe, or one of the top receivers for the Bills, and Gabriel Davis will kind of take a back seat here. So I think Emmanuel Sanders at 7.9% ownership looks great with an optimal lineup probability of 15.4%. The expectation based on the Awesemo tools is that Emmanuel Sanders kind of takes back over his role, because Gabriel Davis didn't really do that much with it when he took over for Emmanuel Sanders. So yeah, I think Emmanuel Sanders is probably my favorite of the cheap receivers in this game. Are you any different there?
No, and it's funny too, because I ask you these questions, but it's kind of a lead on, because I know that we had the same conversation yesterday. But here's the thing that really stands out about Emmanuel Sanders, and it's what you said also when it comes to Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis is projected to be somewhat popular today, not quite as much ownership projected today as we had yesterday. I don't remember the exact number yesterday, but I think we had Gabriel Davis around 20%. Now he's in the teens today, but still, he's a lot more popular than Emmanuel Sanders, picking up more than double the ownership right now. And something to consider is that the field is just assuming Gabriel Davis is that guy as the third receiver for the Buffalo Bills. And that's maybe the case. We don't know for sure. Like you were saying before, there's some uncertainty there. Emmanuel Sanders has been hurt. But let's say Emmanuel Sanders ends up being the third wide receiver today instead of Gabriel Davis. That means not only every reception, every pass, every target that goes to Emmanuel Sanders is fantasy points for him. It's fantasy points that aren't going towards Gabriel Davis. So he's one of the players that actually look at as a leverage play that makes sense on this slate, when it's kind of hard to find them on a 2-game slate. Because when we're talking about some of the running backs before, like Jalen Richard over Josh Jacobs, probably not that realistic. Same goes for Samaje Perine over Joe Mixon. We generally are looking for some kind of weird fluky situation or an injury, where this, I think there's an actual real path where this makes sense from a logic standpoint, where Emmanuel Sanders just runs more routes than Gabriel Davis and has a better fantasy game. So he is somebody who I look at as a really strong GPP option at wide receiver today.
Yeah. And I will say, just based on, this is kind of anecdotal, but I just finished up on my playoff best ball drafts. Gabriel Davis was going a lot higher than Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders was going undrafted in those drafts. So I think that this is probably likely the case, that this is kind of what the field is going to be thinking, that Gabriel Davis is the guy. Emmanuel Sanders will get overlooked. So if that is the case, then yeah, I think I really like the play. I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to get overlooked. So I'm going to be above the field there.
And then just talking about some of the Patriots wide receivers, because we didn't really spend that much time on them. Who is your favorite GPP option from the Patriots? It's pretty clearly the worst wide receiver corps to target of any of them, because we didn't like Mac Jones at all. Like I said, 0% chance of the Patriots being the top stack and the top stack stool for a 2-game slate. But if you had to play one of these Patriots wide receivers, who would be the guy?
Probably Nelson Aguilar, just based on his ownership and his price tag. Only projects for 10.1% ownership, but optimal 14.2% of the time. So in a vacuum, he is the one who has the best leverage in the scenario. Obviously, if you can get to Jacoby Myers, he's the more likely to pay off if you can get to 5,000. But he is a slight negative leverage on this because everybody knows that they're going to get to him a lot more. He is the safer of the two, despite not scoring that many touchdowns. He's optimal 26.2% of the time. So he is optimal more frequently than Nelson Aguilar, but the ownership is there at 26.7%. So I would probably play Nelson Aguilar in more lineups than Jacoby Myers, or at least relative to the field. Do you feel differently there?
No, I think that makes sense. Once again, the Patriots guys are such low priorities for me as patch catchers, and we're about to talk about the tight ends as well. And I'm going to feel the same way about them. If I don't like the same reason I don't like Mac Jones, I don't like his pass catchers. I don't think Bill Belichick is going to be committed to throwing the football today, unless the Bills get up by like 2-3 touchdowns. Then they're going to have no choice. They're absolutely going to have to throw to get back into the game. If not, we've seen this game play out before. If the Patriots are ahead and they're having success running the football, Bill Belichick will have Mac Jones throw the ball three times the entire game, and he'll be totally cool with that. We saw this play out a few weeks ago, so it's hard for me to have too much faith in any of these guys. Anything else you want to talk about from the wide receiver standpoint? If not, we could talk about some of the suboptimal tight end plays here.
No, I think we covered all the wide receivers we really need to.
All right, let's talk about the suboptimal tight end plays. Dawson Knox, Hunter Henry. I know you briefly talked about Jonnu Smith earlier. Of these tight ends, from a projection standpoint, we've got Dawson Knox. I guess he looks okay. Hunter Henry, kind of the same goes for him, but it's hard for me to really get behind Mac Jones. In general, at tight end, if I'm spending up, it's Waller over Knox all day. If I'm playing somebody on the cheaper end, it's going to be Uzoma over the likes of Hunter Henry or Jonnu Smith. But if you have to play one of the tight ends in this game, somebody's holding Tyler Zander hostage, and your intention is to save him for whatever reasons unknown. You want to save, he did a really good Photoshop job yesterday. So that's the reason to save Tyler. Tyler's life is on the line. You have to pick one tight end as the best points per dollar play from Patriots-Bills. Who are you going with?
Yeah, so I think you saved yourself yesterday, Tyler. I think I will save you just because that Photoshop was so great. Man, it's hard because I don't love any of them. They all look so bad. Probably Jonnu Smith, just because he is the cheapest. We've talked about with other positions, just because he allows you to get to more other spots. Because he's only 2,700, he is optimal the least often of any of the 5 viable tight ends. He's only optimal 4.8% of the time, but he's also only owned 7.5% of the time. So I'm willing to take those chances on a 2-game slate. So I think that just because the ownership is so low and the salary is so low, it'd probably be Jonnu Smith for me. I'm sorry, Tyler.
Tyler, sorry, you're not going to make it. As they say in the crypto and Twitter space, NGMI, not going to make it, man. We've got some tough decisions to make here. We've got about a minute left here, and I don't think there's too much value in talking about the DSTs individually, but just kind of an overarching strategy question I want to ask you before we end the show and hand it over to the Live Before Lock guys. Also, guys, do us a favor, like this video, give the guys who are coming up next a little bit to feel good about when they look at the like numbers. But in terms of rules that you're making for DSTs versus the players they're against, how many players are you willing to play against defenses?
It'll probably be the highest number. Honestly,
okay.
because I would. So if we do want to talk about one, I kind of like the Raiders in this spot, just because Joe Burrow was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL this year. The offensive line is just not great for the Bengals, and I still really like the Bengals offense. So it wouldn't be that shocking to me if the Raiders get to him 4 or 5 times, but Joe Burrow still has a huge game. So I think that, the answer for me is I'm not going to have a really low. It's probably going to be the highest number possible. Maybe it'll be 4 or something. I don't know, but yeah, I think, and they're also the cheapest. So I think the Raiders also allow you to get to other stacks, and they allow you to do the full onslaught of the Bengals. So for me, I think that I'm just going to allow an infinite number of pass catchers against the defense. players.
Infinite, just 15. Play the
However
entire,
many
play the
they'll let me
entire,
do.
play the
Yeah.
entire other team against them. The other thing to consider too, it's a 4 defense slate. There's only 2 games to choose from here. The Raiders are the cheapest. Is it that crazy to think all of these defenses score like 5 to 7 fantasy points? Or who knows? Maybe there's a punt return for a touchdown or something stupid like that breaks. It's like the worst way for 2 game slates to be broken is a punt or kick return for touchdown. It's not out of the realm of possibility. You could even make the case, if you're really trying to galaxy brain it, the Raiders are going to give up so many points, they're going to have more opportunities to return kicks for touchdowns, which makes their defense look a little bit more favorable. But it's a 2 game slate. They're cheap and they're not going to be that popular. So that's more than enough reason to go to them. I don't think defense is something you should really be sweating when you're making decisions today. That is going to do it for Neil and us today on the Deeper Dive. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and stick around because Live Before Lock is coming up next.
What's going on? It is time for the Awesemo Live Before Lock Show Wild Card Saturday edition. 2-game slate here, and I am joined by an all-star cast here. Jordan Vanek here for the second week in a row, and joining us this week, Terry McBride here. I'm excited to do a show with you. We've had a show, a Saturday Live Before Lock, where I was the analyst, you were the host. Excited to flip things up here. Terry, how are you doing this Saturday?
All right. It's been a weird couple of days personally, but DFS-wise, things are going well, so can't be all bad. And yeah, psyched to be here and flip the script a little bit and be in the analysis chair and talk through this little 2-gamer with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. A little healthy escapism as we dig into some playoff football. Exactly. I dig it here. And Jordan, how you doing, buddy? Second week in a row, we're digging into a short slate on a Saturday. How you feeling about this one?
This one's a lot better than the last time we did this, where, we were trying to figure out how long Dallas is going to be in the game for. And Jerry Jones decided 4 quarters was, just the right number to play their starters in that one. But this one, it's playoff football, a lot different than anything we've had in recent weeks. And it's an awesome slate. I mean, I think this is actually a fun slate. Obviously, one game's not as liked, but I still don't think the cold weather is going to affect it too much.
That's fair enough. You can follow Jordan at Jordan Vanek DFS, follow Terry at DigitalB21, and you can follow me at Draftaholic on Twitter. What's going on, guys? All right, this 2-game slate, Neil and Greg really helped us out breaking down basically all the fantasy relevant players. So let's look at things from a macro perspective before we dig into this position by position, because all the players we're going to talk about. So Jordan, we'll start with you. It's a 2-game slate. We do have a pretty strong differential in the Vegas totals from these 2 games, and there is some weather that some people at least are concerned about. What is your strategy going into this one in terms of how you play a 2-game slate and the games you're considering here?
So obviously the Cincy Raiders game is going to be the most stacked one on the slate. And for me, when I went through and did my crunches and built my lineups, I'm overweight on Derek Carr on that side of things. I think that the Raiders passing offense will be able to get the job done from their side of the ball. And for me, in tournaments, especially large field GPPs, I think Derek Carr can get up there in the points per dollar basis. I believe I was on him in the first look show originally, and I find myself getting a lot of the premier players with him, which is really nice.
All right, so for you, it's mostly about game selection. You really are focusing on those Vegas totals, and then, going to the passing attack of the underdog team that's probably going to be down at some point and needing to pass. That makes a lot of sense. Terry, how about you? How does your strategy change on a 2-game slate versus even a 3 or a 6-game or certainly a main slate?
Sure. So for a lot of the main slates, I think we get a lot of our roster spots from we're taking some, of the good chalk on the board. We're getting a lot of our lineup informed by who we're stacking with the quarterback, what our stack looks like, what the run back situation might be. And then it kind of fills in around the edges. Whereas on a 2-game slate, we kind of know all of that out of the gate because these things are already, there's only so many choices and there's only so many ways these things come together. So what I really try and focus on a slate of this size is trying to get A, positively leveraged guys into my lineup, and then B, just looking at the pure raw ownership and trying to work in some of the just purely low owned plays, let alone the amount of times that they come in the optimal lineup rate. Those are important, but I think there is a need to just differentiate some lineups here, make some plays that are different than what I would normally do. Taking 3 wideouts from the same offense, they were talking about it on the last show, not something I would typically do on a main slate, but on this slate, I think it's viable. Taking multiple players against the defense, I think is viable. My preference is to take a maximum of 1, but I opened it up in Fantasy Cruncher this week because I think it makes some sense to just, you really want to get different. We're not trying to be right. We're trying to win, as Adam frequently says. So that's the approach I'm taking here. I'm taking some differentiated shots, some low owned plays. Like I'll have probably some more Mac Jones than in the field will, just on the chance. 5.8% optimal is not a flat 0. It's not a good stack situation, but there is the opportunity to roster him, get to some differentiated lineups, and make something happen there. So I'm going to be taking some shots like that DFS wise.
Yeah, that Patriots offense though, man, I don't know what the ceiling is, but no, from a uniqueness standpoint and getting unique in your lineups and trying to win a tournament, I completely understand where you're coming from. But It is hard to look
ain't
at
comfy.
the alternative scenarios in these 2-game slates, but we know how a lot of people are going to be building their lineups, certainly with the most likely outcomes pretty clearly defined in both of these games. Let's talk about injuries briefly. Actually, not a lot to talk about, as you mentioned, Jordan, certainly compared to last week. The Raiders and the Bills actually have no inactives. The Bengals, they have a defensive lineman, Josh Tupou is out. I probably butchered that name. And for the Patriots, Isaiah Wynn is out. They have 11 players questionable. We're probably not going to have that information this hour, that's for sure. Running back Damian Harris, Jacoby Myers, and a bunch of defenders. Jordan, is that affecting how you're building your lineups or your player pool, at least in this final hour before the slate locks?
I mean, I think for me, the Damian Harris one is making him kind of come under owned. So I think I'm getting a little bit more of him just because of the fact that it is a unique slate, 2 games. And we've seen him in the 2 appearances against the Bills on limited carries. He had 18 for 103 and 10 for 111. He scored 4 times. Someone I didn't expect to be coming in as low owned as I've seen him. And for the Patriots, I think I saw a report about Jalen Mills being out, and that is going to be the reason that the Patriots play more man-to-man coverage. The only thing with that Patriots team that I know for sure is they're going to try their best to take away Stephon Diggs. And other than that, I'm not really too concerned about their injuries.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these questionable players are might be the classic Bill Belichick clogged injury report. Dare I say, Terry, is that a crazy notion by me?
No, I think that's probably very much the case here. So I expect these guys to be out there. I expect it's kind of full go. I do like the leverage situation that we're projecting on Harris, specifically on DK right now. He's got a solid leverage score coming up 25.6% optimal, 16.6% owned. So that's a key play to focus in on if you're building for DraftKings. I think that makes a ton of sense. Kind of embrace that questionable nature, and if the public's going away from it, those are the kind of things that we want to lean into. It's not like he's going to be unowned, but if you can gain it any kind of edge on a 2-game slate like this, I think it's kind of mandatory to take it in pretty big shares there.
Yeah. I'm going to have a lot of him. I'm going to be over the field on him, even though I don't feel great about that situation. Okay, guys, give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows, our DFS offers, our giveaways, and much, much more. Once you subscribe, you guys know what to do. Hit the notification button to get alerts when all of our shows go live. And be sure to check out today's free premium tools and data, which include our NBA player projections, our MMA fighter rankings, and NHL ownership projections. Also want to thank our presenting sponsor, Yahoo. Okay, guys, I know there aren't a lot of quarterbacks that we got to talk about. So let's spend the necessary time here to suss out why we might be choosing one quarterback over another. Terry, we'll start with you. Who are the quarterbacks that are really catching your eye in terms of most likely outcomes? And then when you're trying to differentiate yourself, who are some of the quarterbacks you're gravitating toward?
Well, I mean, there's some pretty easy answers on the board there in terms of who's the differentiator option, right? It's going to be Mac Jones if you're really looking to do that. He's owned under 10% on DK. He's owned under 10% on FanDuel. That's your differentiator option. You can say that Derek Carr certainly can differentiate, but at 20% ownership, you're still going up against a fifth of the field in these massive tournaments. So you're still looking to beat out 65,000 lineups in some of these slates if you're playing the biggest tournaments out there. So it's not like a major differentiator, 23% on the DK slate, but he's definitely lower owned than Burrow or Allen, who are going to be our top 2 guys, right? It just kind of follows the obvious line of thought. The Bills do like to throw the ball. Allen's a supremely talented guy, can also get things done with his legs from time to time. Burrow, we've seen everything that passing attack has been doing over the last few weeks. He's got the most capable receiving core on the board today. So I think if I'm picking it, just going with who do I think is most likely to be the highest scoring quarterback of the day, it would be Joe Burrow for me. But that's also reflected in the ownership, 33% owned on DK, coming up as one of the more highly owned, 37% owned on the FanDuel slate, a little bit more than Allen. Those 2 are super popular. They make a ton of sense. If you're using them, I would try and differentiate one of the pass catching options that you throw in with them, but it makes a ton of sense to go to them. But I do like I said at the top, to get differentiated, to get some of that leverage that comes with Derek Carr, to get some of that low ownership that comes with Mac Jones. So I will be looking to get to those guys. And the way I have it set up in Cruncher is just to kind of give me an even distribution of quarterbacks, and then I'll let my selection process kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I that does make sense. Certainly from a game theory standpoint. I cannot find any holes in this Buffalo Bills defense, except for the fact that they don't have Trey White, obviously lost for the year earlier in the season. They're still number 1 in the NFL in yards allowed per pass attempt, number 1 in the NFL in points allowed per play, and second in the NFL, second toughest among all defenses remaining in the playoffs here. So while Mac Jones, again, from a game theory perspective, he's the low owned guy that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm really struggling to get past Derek Carr in my player pool. And Jordan, I know you brought up Derek Carr as someone that you're kind of leaning on in tournaments. Can you point to some reasons why you're going there, or is it simply just the game theory for why you're getting to more Derek Carr today?
So the return of Darren Waller having a second week is going to help him tremendously. And like the way he gets there is through the air. He's 1,500 less than Joe Burrow. And for me, I feel like their gap should be a lot closer than it is from Burrow to Allen. He's coming in 20% is definitely a quarter of the field. For me, I'm doubling that, and I'm actually going underweight on Burrow specifically and matching the field on Allen. And I am not playing Mac Jones today. I don't believe that the Patriots, the way that they win this game is going to be through the air. I think it's going to be the heavy dose of the running, and that's the way they're going to do it. And for me, with Derek Carr, this Cincinnati Bengals team, when they first matched up, Burrow had basically one of the worst games he's had all year. And from a perspective of what Joe Burrow's production has come from, it's been a lot of cover 1 coverage, cover 0. You saw it in the Cincy game, or Kansas City game. You saw it in Baltimore and even Denver. Those teams run cover 1 at one of the higher rates in the NFL. The Raiders don't do that. They're going to play cover 3. They're going to make you try to push the ball with 2 safeties back there. And that's what it showed, where Joe Mixon was getting 30 carries for 130 yards. If they can stop the run a little bit better, I think that the Raiders it'll be a much closer game, competitive. And just for me, Derek Carr is a guy that for 1,500 less, I'll just take that. And for 12% or less ownership.
We didn't talk about this before. That's pretty much exactly how I'm playing the quarterback position. Terry, hey, you're going to win $1 million and we're going to look like the fools here when you played a Mac Jones stack. But even with 4 viable quarterbacks here, I'm leaning on Derek Carr. I'm under the field on Joe Burrow. He's not a bad play by any stretch. And we've been talking all week here on the Awesemo channel about the ceiling being unparalleled in this 2-game slate here for the Cincinnati passing attack. But I think I want to be over the field on Josh Allen, and I want to be over the field on Derek Carr. If you look at expected fantasy points per game over the last 6 starts for all these players, and again, that's just a volume metric that includes scrambles and rushing stats as well. Josh Allen is at 27.5 expected fantasy points. The next highest player, who is Joe Burrow, is at 19. So in terms of overall opportunity for scoring, I think Josh Allen actually separates himself from the pack. So why don't I go against the field and play some more Derek Carr, especially when I think the negative game script forces him to pass much more than usual here. Any last thoughts on the quarterback position here, Terry? I'm sorry for poo-pooing your Mac Jones pick.
Absolutely not. And that's the right thing to say, right? It's a kind of bananas pick to make. And that's why we're making it, right? And I'm not saying go out there and put Mac Jones in 150 of 150 lineups. What I am saying is if he's at 5.8% ownership and you get him 10%, 12%, just double the field, you're not taking a major risk in terms of your lineup shares. And you could be buying into something nice. He doesn't have to explode for the biggest game out of all 4 of these guys. He just has to keep it close in terms of the competition between the quarterbacks. And he throws a couple touchdown passes, even if it's a run script focused game. I think he's getting at least into the conversation. And then you're saving money on his salary that you can reinvest into some of these other positions. So maybe you get to a skill player combination that nobody else has that has higher upside. It's just about what it does and where it helps you buy in. I certainly agree with what you're saying about this being an awful spot for Mac Jones in terms of a football game. I definitely think he is the most likely guy to be the lowest scoring out of these 4 quarterbacks. Do not get me wrong when I say that I'll have more Mac Jones on the field. I'm not excited about it. It's a DFS price and ownership opportunity play. And even the leverage score doesn't really bear out the opportunity there, right? Again, 5.8% optimal, 5.8% owned. That gives him 0 leverage over the field. I'm just looking to differentiate things and play weird lineups on a 2-game slate. And that's one easy way that I feel like I can get there that also does buy me upside in other spots with unique combinations.
It certainly is. It's that spot where you are contrarian with just that play, and then you can play the chunk of chalk that you love best on this slate with all the rest plays, and they're all premiums, probably premium salary players as well. Okay, guys, Super Wild Card Weekend is almost here. Well, it's actually here right now, which means plenty of opportunities to take down a big NFL showdown or single game GPP. Through Monday, January 17th, our NFL Express weekly pass will only be $1 when you use promo code SUPERWILD. That's all one word, SUPERWILD. And it gives you access to our player and ownership rankings for all NFL slates and everything we have to offer for showdown and single game contests, including our player projections, ownership projections, and our top plays tool. Again, that's super wild at checkout, or you can simply click the link in the description of this video below. Stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo today. Okay, guys, we're going to dig into this running back position, and there are obviously some really strong chalk options at the top. But Jordan, starting with you, what are you doing with Joe Mixon, and who is your second favorite running back? And then maybe who you over the field on at this running back position today?
I'm eating the chalk of Joe Mixon today. Again, the Raiders, the way that they're going to try to play, I think, the Bengals is preventing them from getting Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to be able to get down the field. And that's just going to coincide with Joe Mixon getting a lighter box. And I think the Bengals, when you saw Joe Mixon fully healthy and just the way they utilized him early on in the year, is what you'll see in the playoffs, where he's getting this 20 carry type of game. They're trying to make it so that the pass rush doesn't get there for the Raiders, because that's what they're good at defensively. And then as far as my second favorite running back, it's Damian Harris. I know he's injured. I know he's been limited in practice all week, but the upside of him comparative to some of these guys is like Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris are not too different in terms of style of running backs, but Damian Harris was much better against the Bills than people are, I guess, giving him credit for, it seems, because to be 200 less than Jacobs and coming in at 20% less ownership for a guy that's had 4 touchdowns and over 100 yards rushing in both games against this team is just not something I'm buying into. And then my third favorite to me is probably Devin Singletary, who has been getting a lot of the touches all year, but I'm not utilizing 3 running backs in a lot of my builds.
Okay, so it's a wide receiver heavy slate for you. That makes a lot of sense. Terry McBride, sorry, I just had to. You probably have Damian Harris high on your player pool as well because of that high leverage score. Are there any of these other running backs, particularly below Harris in salary? Are you going to a Brandon Bolden, Ramondre Stevenson? Are either of you going to a Jalen Richard? Terry, how are you feeling about some of these more obscure running back names?
Yeah, I definitely want to get some shares of Stevenson, some shares of Bolden in my life. I like Bolden's involvement in the passing game most weeks. I like the price at 5,000. He's coming up. All of the running backs on FanDuel are essentially at positive leverage or just meh on the leverage score, right? Even Joe Mixon, only a negative 0.3 leverage score on FanDuel. He's 70% optimal, 70% owned with a little decimal in there as well. It's a different situation leverage-wise on the FanDuel slate as compared to DK, where you get Damian Harris on DK at a monster leverage score, and then the other 3 primary backs at negative leverage. You want to play them all. I'm excited about the Joe Mixon spot, but it's a little bit different from site to site. So I think that's worth calling out in when I talk about these shares, because I'm just kind of taking a lot of the chalk running backs here and going with the most likely top scorers. But I do want to try and mix in more shares of Stevenson, Bolden, a little bit of Richard, and probably even a little bit of Samaje Perine, even though he's a negative 3.4. He's the only guy at a strong negative leverage mark on FanDuel. It's a 2.5% optimal, 5.9% ownership. So it's just in single digit low ownership. I'll take that negative leverage mark. I don't really care. That's just kind of a dart throw in they sling one out to him and he happens to break an 80-yard touchdown or something like that. I'll want to have a couple shares of that possibility. I do not think he's a prime option today. The other guys are more interesting to me from that lower tier.
Yeah, what's funny is that Jalen Richard's name has come up in a bunch of shows this week, and I definitely understand it. Josh Jacobs is usually much more utilized in positive game scripts for the Raiders. I don't think that's happening. That's why I'm over the field on Derek Carr. I think they're going to be passing a lot. So maybe Jalen Richard gets in there, but now we just don't have a lot of fantasy viable running backs, especially at this bottom salary tier. Jalen Richard is getting double the ownership of Samaje Perine. And I feel like both of them have an equally low probability of actually hitting here. So why not just go with the lower owned player in Perine, especially in large field tournaments when I know Mixon is going to be heavily, heavily owned. I'm not saying he's not the best player, the best running back on the slate. I have a ton of Joe Mixon, but just again, from that game theory standpoint, there's a lot of leverage I directly get off of Mixon if I play Perine. How are you feeling about that, Jordan, or is that just too rich for you blood? Too rich for your blood, excuse me.
I mean, if it's not that is for me, not a bad play. I just think that if I go really low, I'll go to Brandon Bolden because of just assuming that if it's not Damian Harris and the Bills do get up early on, I could see Bolden having an expanded role as the pass catching back. Just when you compare those Jalen Richards and stuff like that, I don't like the 3 running back build with one of them because when you look at the receivers, you have Zay Jones, who's 4K, Gabe Davis, 39, Brian Edwards, 33, even Deshaun Jackson for 31. I just think that these receivers have better chances at being optimal than those backup running backs. I get the idea of being unique, but I think I would only deploy them in 2 running back builds on DraftKings because that's where I'm obviously primary playing.
I hear you. Okay, is this the time to talk about it? Because we actually got into an almost immediate debate when we logged into our Zoom call before the show, because there are some of us, yours truly, who believe that the cold weather in Buffalo might actually make a difference, that there's not some arbitrary wind line of 15 miles an hour where it suddenly matters. I know we have to create these arbitrary lines in sports all the times, these thresholds before we have to consider it. And I know that weather is built into things like our projections and Vegas totals, but I am actually high on all these running backs for the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots. I think the passing is going to be down. I have a feeling you disagree with me, Jordan.
I mean, that Josh Allen game in the first one, like the man can just throw through the wind. I have no problem with Josh Allen.
Can his players catch through the wind or through the cold?
Yes. I mean, Gabe Davis caught that touchdown on the seam route, and then Josh Allen overthrew him on the second one. Diggs, I think Dawson Knox was the one who was having the drop problems, but I think that was like his second week off the broken hand. So I just don't believe that Josh Allen's going to be much affected by that wind. Mac Jones, on the other hand, I mean, we saw the Patriots say, hey, you're not throwing the football today. Never seen that in my time watching football. And something that I'm just like, okay, if this game's close, they're just going to be that 65, 70% run rate, just like they were trying to do in that first really, really bad weather game.
I'm just saying it's possible, Terry. That's all I'm saying, that it's possible that 3 degrees Fahrenheit at kickoff and negative 10 degrees at the wind chill in the fourth quarter sucks. I think that sounds like it sucks for people who have to tackle running backs all game. And I think Bill Belichick is going to do his due diligence here and make sure those running backs get plenty of touches so that those linebackers in Buffalo have to keep tackling and tackling and tackling and tackling until one of them misses that tackle and suddenly they can break a game that they have no business winning wide open. Am I absolutely nuts here, Terry, for playing players like Brandon Bolden, Ramondre Stevenson? We saw Stevenson, I know it was preseason, but he broke off some huge runs and he's probably their most explosive rusher. Are you following my narrative at all here, or am I nuts?
I'm following it because I want to get to those guys anyway. I want to get to those guys because of their salaries, because of their DFS projections, because of the lack of ownership, the potential for upside, all of those different reasons. I'm curious what the arbitrary temperature is. Since you said it was arbitrary with wind speed, is it not the same arbitrary nature with when we're just picking a temperature? Is it below 10 degrees? Is it below 15, 25? Should we use Celsius? Like where does it suddenly become an untenable situation for playing football? And I would throw in, if you're on offense, you have to go out onto the field away from where all the heaters are. Well, don't you just want to really quickly score, make a big play, get off the field, get back over to the heater, screw the defense, get them back out on the field where it's cold? The heaters are over on the sidelines. These guys want to get on and off the field quick.
That's what they play for. They play for their distance to their proximity to the heaters.
The
That's
heaters.
what they love. Actually, that's not a bad point at all. And no, I don't have the data. And yes, I'm walking down narrative street and having a lot of fun here. But I do think it's possible that one or two plays go differently. A pass deflects off a hand because of that cold weather.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's not quantifiable, but I do think that there's a higher possibility of higher variance or more
Absolutely.
randomness than we usually see. And I do think that if Bill Belichick, that crazy mastermind, is looking at this, he goes, maybe my only way of winning is to just run it down their throat once again. I know we already saw it. They threw 3 times in that victory against Buffalo's. So they're going to have to do something different here, but just figured I'd walk down that road with you guys. All right. I think we've exhausted that position pretty well here. Let's talk about our sponsor with Yahoo. We have partnered with Yahoo Fantasy this NFL season to bring you some great offers. Check out our exclusive limited time offer, which gets you 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. To qualify, you need to be new to Yahoo, sign up for an account via the link below in the description, and deposit and play. That's it. Yahoo will send us your name, and after that, we'll get you all set up. But if you need immediate access, we got you hooked up as well. Email support@awesemo.com, and we'll get you set up right away. You can also claim a $10 of free site credit by clicking the link in the video description below. Perfect time to enter the $500,000 NFL Wildcard Ballers today, and the Sunday one as well, and the $75,000 playoff game challenger featuring no management fee, aka it's much cheaper to play. Pretty good deals over there. Get started at Yahoo today. Okay, Jordan, this is your bread and butter, man. The wide receiver position, you're saying it's a wide receiver week. Talk to me about what you're doing with these Cincinnati wide receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins.
And Tyler Boyd, who is actually my favorite receiver on the entire slate. Boyd is one of the players that I'm going to be well over the field on. And it's actually funny. I like, for playoff matchups, I like to go check out the odds and see where their props are at. And I went to Odd Shopper just because I wanted to go see what was going on over there. And FanDuel's got Tyler Boyd's receiving yards props at a 40-yard mark, and we've got him projected 52. So you got a high win rate there, and I think that one is a lock for me in the way that I'm building my lineups today. And in terms of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, Chase has obviously the ability to completely break the slate, but I think Higgins is my preferred option between the two of them, not even just from a price perspective, but just also considering the fact that, like, Jamar Chase has the most yards and touchdowns against cover 1. Raiders don't really do that. And when you look at the yards metrics versus cover 3, they're pretty equal, and that's what T. Higgins missing some games. And in terms of targets per route run, T. Higgins gets targeted against cover 3 32% of the time, while Jamar Chase's numbers at like 25, and then Tyler Boyd's at 22.
Okay, so you're all in on these receivers, and from a value perspective, yeah, I'm so sorry that T. Higgins' receiving yard ceiling is 194 yards and not 266 yards, Terry. Are you kind of feeling the same way here about these wide receivers in Cincinnati? And then talk to us about the other side of the ball. I know they have Darren Waller back, but are you getting to any of these Las Vegas wide receivers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the Tyler Boyd call there. I love the leverage mark on him on the DK slate up close to 10 actually in this latest update. So really like getting to him there, and he's positively leveraged on FanDuel as well. It's not as extreme on FanDuel where you get Emmanuel Sanders from the other game at the top leverage score, but he's the second most positively leveraged player there. So I do like getting to more shares of Tyler Boyd than the field is, although it's an aggressive number on the FanDuel slate. And then, yeah, I'm going to be spreading shares to the rest of the Cincinnati passing attack. I want to work the tight end in there, and I definitely want to get to some options on the other side of that, both in constructions where I'm rostering Carr in the quarterback, and then as run back plays to my massive shares of the Cincinnati stack, which, like I mentioned before, I'm getting lineups that are coming up in Fantasy Cruncher with 3 of these wideouts from the Cincinnati side, which becomes concerning to me in normal circumstances. But on a 2-game slate, I do think it's viable. I'm also getting some crunches with Joe Mixon and 2 of the wideouts, which again starts to stretch credulity a little bit under normal circumstances. But for this kind of a slate, I do think it's viable. So if I'm going that heavy into one of these passing attacks and leaning into the favorite team, I definitely think I want to grab some of the underdog and use them as run backs. So I'll be taking some shots on Bryan Edwards, some shots on Zay Jones. I obviously want to have a lot of Hunter Renfrow in my life. The leverage situation on Renfrow isn't really a factor here, or isn't really the primary driving force on why I want to get it. I just like the optimal lineup score he's got. 33.5% of the time he's in the optimal. That's something worth targeting, even at basically efficient ownership. So I'm happy to get to all pieces of the passing attack in this one.
Yeah, I am too, but I'm actually boosting up the top priority plays, the Jamar Chases, the T. Higgins, and Joe Mixon in the running game as well, which is actually limiting the amount I'm getting to Tyler Boyd. He certainly has a good projection. His projection compared to salary-based expectation makes him look like a really solid value. I was looking at our player props tool, and on Odds Shopper, his over 40.5 receiving yards hits 61% of the time. That looks like a really, really solid prop bet. And I might actually make that prop bet instead of playing him in DFS. I'm just not necessarily a believer in the ceiling. I'm trying to win first place. And as we talked about before, I kind of made the decision to anchor my lineups by going a little bit under the field on Joe Burrow, saving that salary so I could get up to players like Chase, like Higgins, and Mixon. Now, on this wide receiver core for Las Vegas, you hit on it. As DFS options, I think they're okay, right? Like Bryan Edwards, Deshaun Jackson, Zay Jones had an increased target share. I actually saw that in our Odds Shopper tool that the under on their receptions props were all positive ROI bets. The under for 2.5 receptions for Edwards is a 75% win probability. Jordan, how are you feeling about the Raiders as run back options, or just in general here, especially if you're stacking Carr?
Yeah, as someone who's stacking Carr, like Zay Jones has just impressed me with, like, he's had 5 receptions in every game since week 14. He's getting 7 or more targets. Even with Darren Waller coming back last week, who got 9 targets, he still managed to get 8. He's obviously not been the high yard monster, but he's produced. And for me on DraftKings, I'm comfortable with the high floor on a 2-game slate, especially he has the ability to find the end zone with the attention Renfrow and Waller will be pulling. Edwards is just one of those guys that he's always out there. He is always on the field, but he's just some of those games. It's like, what is he doing? I don't know.
Win sprints, Jordan. Win sprints.
He's getting that win sprint award. So if I'm choosing between Edwards and Deshaun Jackson, I personally like Deshaun Jackson a little bit more, just because I know what he is in terms of just that big play upside. Darren Waller is the dude that I'm, again, going to be over the weight on, just because I am overweight on Carr. And in their first matchup, he managed to get over 100 yards against Cincy. And Cincy's given up, I think, 4 100-yard games to tight ends this season, which I believe is the most in the NFL. And then even Foster Moreau, like, if you want to go the cheap and completely pivot off of Darren Waller, I don't mind Moreau at all. He's not someone that's going to pop up a lot, but when it comes to just that one play, like 3,100, he can get that touchdown. And the tight end position today isn't exactly clamoring with points, so you can get Moreau for a lot cheaper, and that allows you to go get Josh Allen and go get your Jamar Chase or T. Higgins or whoever you want to play in that wide receiver position.
You're so excited to talk about Foster Moreau. You can't wait till the tight end segment. You got to talk about Foster Moreau. I love you, man. 2-game slate. We get to the tight ends. We got 22 minutes left. We got to go. No, I completely understand the logic there. And I actually think that Hunter Renfrow, I think the last time I saw his touchdown prop was plus 200. I kind of like that call, especially if we think that's going to be a shootout. And if I'm talking about liking Higgins and Chase, then you're going to have Derek Carr and company flying back, trying to keep pace as well. And that you're going to need somebody other than Darren Waller to help in the receiving core. Hunter Renfrow has taken a step back in usage a little bit here, but I still think his 6,400 salary on DraftKings could absolutely pay off. In this Buffalo and New England game, this is the one where we kind of differentiate. So Jordan, we're going to bounce right back to you. In the Buffalo receiving core, obviously Stephon Diggs is the number 1 there, but who are you getting to the most? And are there any players that you really want to prioritize? If it's Diggs or anybody else, let me know.
So with that Buffalo receiving attack, Gabe Davis came in shockingly high on the ownership side of things. Didn't really expect that one. The think Emmanuel Sanders is probably the second best player outside of Stephon Diggs, just from a tournament perspective. If you're playing that large field GPP, like he's coming in significantly lower owned. He's sub 10%, which is basically he's in line with Deshaun Jackson in ownership. Like Deshaun Jackson is 1.9 projected less ownership, and Emmanuel Sanders has had games with this Buffalo Bills team. He hasn't done a ton recently, but he's also been a little bit banged up. And again, against New England, like they're going to do their best to take away Diggs. If you think that they don't have the eyes on Cole Beasley and Dawson Knox next, that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to take away both of them. It's going to leave Emmanuel Sanders and Gabe Davis with a chance to make some plays. Gabe Davis did it in the really cold game the first time around, scoring that touchdown on the seam route. But Emmanuel Sanders is still a capable player. It's just the targets just haven't gone his way.
Yeah. Terry, how about you? You feeling the same way about these Buffalo receivers?
Yeah, I definitely want to get to some shares of Emmanuel Sanders there, just given that leverage score, given the 8.5% ownership probability on FanDuel. That's just way too low, 7.9% on DK. When we think about this guy's talent, I know he's been, on and off the field. I know he's lost some target share, but if he's going to be that low owned, I think that's a strong differentiation point. He's only got to do so much for us at that low salary and that low ownership to really be an inflection point on this slate. So I want to get to him. I agree. I want to get to some shares of the tight end in this offense as well. I think that makes a lot of sense on the Buffalo side of things. And then I'll be taking some shots, obviously, on the New England passing game a little bit more maybe than some others will. And I have low expectations for the success, but it's that kind of slate where we're just kind of, to differentiate lineups on this slate, you got to get a little bit wacky. I was just looking through some of the ownership products and I have it calculated out where it's giving me like the unique 1 in X times. And typically, the vast majority of my lineups are in the hundreds of thousands when it comes to, how many times, how many lineups will it be unique. On this slate, most of these, I'm getting lineups that's 1 in 1,300 unique, 1 in 2,600 unique. These are worthless lineups in a slate that's going to have, 250, 300,000 entries on it. It's just going to be duped. So if you win, it's not going to do much for you. I mean, it's nice to chop, a giant pot even 25, 30 ways, but we're looking for that solo win. And that is just so difficult. So anywhere we can grab a little bit of differentiation, I'm looking to do it. And that's what you get out of leaning into that, the New England side, and then the less respected Bills pass catchers here and going to that game where the narrative is pushing people away.
Let's talk about that for a minute, Terry. So you're obviously taking a more analytical approach with some of our tools, and that's how you're getting to some of these lineups. I think that's really, really helpful for some of us who like to use that numbers-based approach. When you get that situation where you're trying to win a tournament, obviously, let's say it's at 10,000, 20,000 people in the tournament, and it's a great looking lineup, but you're getting that it's going to be, it's 1 in 2,500. But at the same time, the projection is very high. Is it under no circumstances that you're playing that lineup in that tournament? Or are there situations, even on a small slate, where you're going to take a chance?
Look, if I'm building 150 lineups, I'm only playing 50 in this giant FanDuel tournament just to have it. And I'd probably play a full slate if I wasn't on the show. But for something like that, if in 150, I would throw in maybe some of those just to have the opportunity to, all right, that is the most likely lineup to have the most likely highest scorers. So even if it's duped, do I go along with the field on some of them? I don't mind riding some of the lineups that have a little bit of a lower unique number or a higher ownership product. But typically I am looking to win these tournaments and be the only winner. That's where you really set yourself apart. So we're not really shooting for the cash line in DFS tournaments. We're not really shooting to chop this pot a lot of ways. So for the most part, I want the bulk of these entries to be as differentiated as I can possibly make them. And even then, I'm still going to be duped. Like, I don't think that I'm entering a unique lineup in this contest. I am kind of accepting the fact that I will be duped unless I do something completely bizarre. Maybe some of these Mac Jones entries that I'm still struggling to even find sorting by the probability metrics. Maybe some of those get unique, but it's tough to get truly unique in this one. So maybe in that kind of a circumstance too, you kind of give in to the idea that it's so difficult to get unique. Maybe I do ride with some of the more probable ones because let's face it, on a 2-game slate, this is also kind of a for fun, for compulsion, to feed the dopamine rush and all of that. The reason that we're all playing this slate in the first place.
How dare you? Idea. How dare you say we're degenerates? What? What in the world? Politely. Yeah, you said it very, very nicely. That's true. That's true. And I got to mention, like, one of the things that we consistently at Awesemo.com have been bullish on are the auxiliary weapons for the Buffalo Bills, really for the last 2 seasons. I don't even have to look at the projections. Are the Bills playing? Okay, we're over the field on Cole Beasley. That's basically how we are week to week here. And I know there has been some variation with how Beasley has been used over the last few weeks. In his last 5 starts, he still has a 20% target share. He's the only player other than Diggs to have a target share over 20%. I do agree with you guys that players like Emmanuel Sanders are popping in our tools. Over 23.5 receiving yards has over a 60% win probability right now on Odd Shopper, so that looks like a really solid bet. I actually am making one major change here when I'm building lineups in Cruncher. I'm actually getting to less wide receivers from the Buffalo Bills, not necessarily because I dislike them, not necessarily because I think the cold weather is going to shut them out, but I think that Josh Allen's rushing ability might be the skeleton key for this team. And so I'm skinny stacking the Buffalo Bills, meaning I'm not getting to really any of lineups with, say, Diggs, Beasley, and Knox. Am I crazy to leave those out, Jordan? Or are you getting to a bunch of stacks with, all sorts of Josh Allen stacks with multiple receivers, or are you mostly skinny stacking?
I mean, I don't think you're crazy at all for that. I think Josh Allen is going to use his legs a lot. We saw him use his legs towards the end of the season when they just needed those must-win games. He had 3 games with 12 or more carries, 2 of them that he scored in. One of them he had 2 touchdowns in. Like, Josh Allen is a quarterback that is built and he can do it in plenty of ways. If the Patriots are looking to take away Diggs and those passing options, I think there's a way to get Josh Allen and just be naked with him completely. Like, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities, and definitely a way to get unique in this tournament. And for just the stacking purposes, like, you don't have to stack Josh Allen with 2 guys. It doesn't always work that way. You can even just stack him with Dawson Knox. Like, you can stack Josh Allen in any way, and I think the most unique way is going to be that Josh Allen naked lineup.
All right, here's the one Bills receiver that I'm taking a stand on. I think Gabriel Davis is underrated in our tools right now. He's got a negative leverage score. He's the wide receiver 12 in our projections, wide receiver 11 in salary. I think that you're going to lean on a young receiver instead of the veterans here. I don't have a lot in the tools that lets me there, but that's just how I'm differentiating myself today. Okay, finally, we talked about them a little bit. The wide receivers for this run-heavy New England Patriots team. Do you have a favorite, Terry, of Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne?
Between just those 2?
Or if you've got any other, I mean, we'll talk about the tight ends in a minute, but if you feel strongly about one, let me know. Help me, please.
Yeah, I'm kind of just taking shares either way of those guys. They come out relatively even in the DK tool in terms of the optimal lineup rate, the leverage score. Aguilar a little bit ahead by leverage, is a 4.1 leverage score, 14% optimal versus Kendrick Bourne's 9% optimal. They're both owned around 10%. We're talking about some coin flips, some nitpicking here. It's pretty similar on the FanDuel slate. So I'm going to just have shares of both of these guys. They're both positively leveraged on FanDuel, both owned around 8%, both optimal around 12%. I'll take them where they come up. I'll probably, if I had to pick one, I guess, gun to my head on FanDuel for 600 less, I'll take Nelson Aguilar over Kendrick Bourne, all else being equal.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning as well. Even on DraftKings too. I mean, if they have essentially an equal probability of hitting, by the way, it's not 0. We're talking about a 10% to a 15% chance of these players hitting. Why not just take the lower salary one and just call it a day here? Same to you, Jordan. I know you're anxious to talk about the tight ends. I promise we will. But any strong feeling here before we move on to the tight end position?
I'll go with Kendrick Bourne. Just it's not exactly the best situation because of how great the Bills are. But we're looking at what the Bills have given up touchdowns on. It's been screen routes and I believe slants, and that's kind of Bourne's role in this offense. He has the second most catches on screens, and I believe he has the most catches on slants. So him, and just the way that I saw him get used when he was in San Francisco was towards the red zone, and just the New England's way is utilizing guys at what they do best. Not a lot of coaches seem to believe that, but for New England, it's worked, and that's why they're such a good system. So Bourne for the TD upside and just what the Bills have been bad at is what he is good at.
The role he was born to play. All right, I'll show myself out.
I know
You
mine.
guys can finish the rest of the show. Give us, after that terrible, terrible joke, give us a like and a subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows here at Awesemo.com. Get more bad jokes like that and DFS offers, giveaways, and much, much more. You guys who have been around, you guys know all the offers that we always have going on. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when all of our shows go live. Also, while you're at it, go ahead and follow Jordan Vanek on Twitter at Jordan Vanek DFS, Terry McBride at DigitalB21, and me at Draftaholic. Okay, Jordan, we're here. We made it. The tight end position. There's obviously a big name at the top, but what are we doing in general with the tight end position, and what are your more contrarian plays that you're getting to?
Well, Foster Moreau is the contrarian play for me that I'll be getting to, and then I don't mind going 2 tight ends with Waller and Knox. I think Ozuma I'm significantly under the field on, just because the Raiders have been bad against tight ends, but he doesn't get much usage against the coverage that the Raiders do deploy. And I think Boyd is the guy that I prefer as the third option for the Bengals. So I think Knox and Waller lineups, and then Knox and even Foster Moreau lineups are the 2 ways I'm getting unique at this position.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry to rewind for 1 second, guys, because we did get a super chat. Oh, we just got a second super chat. So we are going to shout him out. That's awesome, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Crooked Samaritan. I love that name. Zay Jones or Gabriel Davis for a FanDuel GPP. Terry, we'll shoot it to you.
Sorry, what were those choices again?
Zay Jones or Gabriel Davis.
Zay Jones or Gabriel Davis. FanDuel. We are getting, we're getting, looks like Zay Jones quite frequently more optimal. He's the negative leveraged out of those 2, but when we're talking about the optimal lineup rate, he comes up optimal 30.5% of the time versus Gabe Davis 13.3% of the time. Davis is only owned 10.5%. So if you're looking for the dart throw play, it's Davis. But if you're looking for a sound play, you've already made your differentiation plays, you can stick Zay Jones in there and get a little bit more reliability. It depends on what you need in that lineup.
How about you, Jordan?
Went to UCF, was part of that recruiting room while Gabe Davis was there. I'm riding with Gabe Davis for the narrative that I've been able to be around him. A great dude, and excited to watch him catch touchdowns in the playoffs. He actually had a pretty big playoff run last year before having that hamstring injury.
There you go. Does he get mad if you call him Gabe? Does he prefer Gabriel? Because I'll take that back. I started the whole Gabe thing just now.
I mean, I just always called him Gabe. I haven't really talked too much to him.
Okay, sweet.
That was part.
So we're good.
Well, I didn't hang out with him, but I was going to pick him anyways. I was going to pick Gabe. Don't call me Gabriel Davis, apparently. That's my pick as well, even though the tools from an optimal lineup percentage do say Zay Jones. I'm going with my gut here for Gabe Davis in a tournament. Second question from Sean Raza. Thanks again for the $2 super chat. Any P. Ryan or FanDuel GPPs? Terry, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would have a little. I mean, if we're talking about building 150 lineups, I certainly want to work him into some spots. I think what they were saying on the first show about his most likely path to success being a Joe Mixon missing part of the game due to whatever, that would probably be the case. But I think you can mix him in. Like I said, when we were talking about the running back position earlier, all you need is that one little swing out play where he catches a ball, jukes a tackle, and breaks one for 60, 80 yards and gets in the end zone, and you're home free with that play at 5.9% ownership, but he's only 2.5% optimal. So you need that weird play to break. It's a dart throw, but I do like it.
It's an unimpossible dart throw. Same question to you, Jordan.
Not playing too much of the FanDuel side of things, but Perrine, again, it only in lineups that you're just considering Joe Mixon being hurt, because even when they blew out some of these teams, like he wasn't really utilized in any part of the game at all.
That's fair. And thank you again for hanging out with us, guys. We got almost 2,000 people watching right now as we lead up to kickoff. And those super chats came at an amazing time because we have a total of 5 tight ends who have a projection of 3 fantasy points or more. So we don't have a lot to dig into. How much Darren Waller is too much Darren Waller, Terry?
Probably the amount that I have in my lineups, I would expect. I'm guessing I've got way too much of them. I'm just throwing together this crunch and trying to pull different things. As I'm scrolling down, I remember I said I had 50 lineups in for FanDuel, and I just pasted everything into the template here, and way too many. There's only like 3 or 4 of these that don't say his name in the tight end spot, and that's a bad situation. That's not really where I wanted to be. I think he's easily the most viable tight end, by far the most likely tight end to get in the end zone to produce a fantasy relevant score, but the whole damn field's going to be on him. He's owned 70.9% of the time on FanDuel. That's a spot where it's easy to differentiate, kind of like the quarterback position, just by picking anyone else. So I'm going to go hunting for some alternate tight ends in the last couple minutes here.
See, I'm not. I think I can be different by having more Darren Waller than the field, even though he's got a crazy high ownership.
Okay.
Miss me with CJ Uzoma. I get it. And Dawson Knox, he's the one that I feel like if you're going to bet highly on Gabriel Davis and Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley, he's the one that gets pushed out. I mean, obviously, we're talking about who gets the ball in the red zone where it's who's open on a single play. Dawson Knox could be that player. And I even have some Hunter Henry, but I have so much Darren Waller. I'm okay being wrong with Darren Waller. If I have to pick one of these other players, it's actually Hunter Henry. He has an irrationally high touchdown rate. Why not have it keep going for the rest of the playoffs, or at least for this one game here? 18% of his receptions have been in the end zone, which is just a ridiculous number for a full-time player. So I'll try to lean on that upside there. Any other thoughts, Jordan, on the tight end position, which is fairly weak other than Waller today?
Man, you finally helped out Terry with who to stack with Mac Jones. Gave him the good old Hunter Henry is your
I
favorite.
just grabbed one. No joke. I just made sure I had one.
I was like, there you go. That's it. Just stack Mac Jones with Hunter Henry, the other better Hunter on the slate. And Matt called it. If you lose money because of it, it's on him.
Thank you.
Love it.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. All right. Just a few minutes left here before lock. Less than 4. So let's talk about defenses really quick. I know sometimes it's play whoever fits, play whoever you want, but is there any defense you're prioritizing today, Terry?
I can tell you who's probably coming up the most. I mean, by our optimal rate, it's easily the Bills. And we've talked about all the reasons that there's not much expectation behind New England. So that's the easy answer. I'll take that one. 50% optimal, 5.8 leverage score. They're actually not getting owned enough on the FanDuel slate. On the DK slate, I imagine it's probably pretty much the same story. Let me jump over there. Negative leverage on DK, but still 46.9% optimal. I have no issues going to that. But again, it's another spot where you can gain a little bit of easy differentiation by going to any of the other choices. And the other choices are still viable. So I have it's still kind of a take what I get situation for me. But I think the Bills is the right answer to that question.
I think that makes all the sense. Jordan, same question to you. If you can't play the Bills too, add on to that. If you can't play the Bills, who are you playing here?
I'm playing the Raiders. With their pass rush, we've seen Burrow get sacked quite often. I believe he's been sacked 3 or more times in 6 or 7 straight weeks. Raiders haven't scored a touchdown on defense, but I've seen Burrow give up some questionable interceptions at times when he's not being able to get the ball to these receivers. They're the cheapest on DraftKings at $2,500. And they're also coming in sub 10% ownership compared to the field. And again, I know this is your favorite thing to say. Defenses don't matter. They're just not something that score a lot of points. If none of these teams score a touchdown, I think there's a good chance, or defenses score a touchdown, I think there's a good chance that the Raiders end up to be optimal.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So the 2 defenses that I actually have the most of are the Raiders and the Patriots, because they're the 2 cheapest defenses on DraftKings. That's a big part of it. But also because the scenario in which those 2 teams succeed involves both of their defenses showing up in big ways, right? The way that the Raiders stay in this game is that the defensive line of the Raiders, which is one of their strong spots, they're 5th in PFF team defensive line pass rush grades, and the Bengals are well below average in offensive line grades, then you maybe flip the script. You get a few sacks, you get a turnover or 2, as you're talking about, Jordan, and then maybe someone like Josh Jacobs, you pair him up with there in a positive correlation play. The Patriots are number 1 among all playoff teams in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed. That means they're the toughest defense right there with the Bills. And so You know the way that it works here. The cold weather obviously affecting every single player because they're professional athletes who can't deal with cold weather. I say with a wink and a nudge. I do think the Patriots defense shows up here. We know that they are a disciplined, strong defense that can make plays. And if Josh Allen just makes a few risky plays here, I think you can get some turnovers that flip the script. Any last thoughts on defense here, Terry, before we go into some top plays?
No, I agree with what you were just saying there. It looks like just going through some of the lineups that are going in, I am getting to a good amount of Patriots defense. A lot of just differentiated defenses in general here. I'm actually not getting as much of the Bills defense as their probability marks would have suggested I might. So I'm kind of riding in that same vein where I'm taking some of the cheaper defenses, taking some of the shots here.
All right, guys, 10 seconds to lock one answer here. Top player on the slate, Jordan, go.
Tyler Boyd.
And Terry?
I love the Boyd answer, but I mean, how can I not throw Mac Jones into the mix with everything I said about him? That's not the right answer. Probably Joe Mixon overall if we're talking about highest scoring probability for a skill player.
It was T. Higgins for me. Joe Mixon, a close second. I am leaning on the Cincinnati Bengals. We are at lock. It is officially playoff football. The best time of the year, if you ask me. Really, really good games. Guys, I hope you had an amazing time listening to this show, watching this show wherever you are. I hope you win all the money. We've got some great content coming up for you at Awesemo and on the channel here later today. At 4:45, we got the NBA Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock with Aton, with Rinpack, with Greg, and Matt LaMarca. And then at 7:30, we've got the NFL Saturday Night Showdown show with EMAC, with Terry back here, and with Nick Lepre. Until then, I'm Matt Savoca for Jordan Vanek and Terry McBride. Have a great playoffs, guys. We'll see you guys next time.